Hey everyone, I'm Aftermoon Horrors. Before we dive into the story, I want to know, where are you watching from and what time is it for you? It's always fascinating to see listeners tuning in from different places. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy. Story number 1. I know you probably won't believe me when I tell you this, but I've been trying to make sense of it all for years, and I just need to get it off my chest. It all started when my family rented a cabin deep in the Appalachian woods. I was about 12 at the time, the kind of kid who spent too much time reading about ghost stories and other creepy stuff. But, even then, I wasn't prepared for what I'd experience in Black Hollow. It wasn't my idea to go up there, to be honest. My parents thought it would be good for us to disconnect from the world for a while. No distractions, no city noises, just peace and quiet in nature. They found this old cabin on a remote stretch of land, and we were supposed to be staying there for the weekend. A rustic getaway, they called it. Looking back, I'm almost certain it wasn't just a random cabin. The first night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing something scratching, maybe? Like fingernails dragging along wood, but not outside. It was inside. I brushed it off as an animal, maybe a raccoon or something, but it didn't feel right. It wasn't random. It was rhythmic, methodical, almost deliberate. Like whatever it was, it knew exactly where to scratch. I kept telling myself I was just being paranoid. I had been reading a lot of those old ghost stories after all. My dad had set up an old wood stove in the corner of the cabin, and my mom had gotten a fire going. The smell of pine wood mixed with the damp air from outside, and it all felt wrong. Even then, I couldn't put my finger on why. I had a knot in my stomach, like I was being watched. By the second night, the sounds had gotten worse. I remember trying to fall asleep in the top bunk of the small bedroom, the old wooden beams creaking overhead. The sounds weren't just from inside the cabin anymore. They were coming from the woods, soft, distant whispers that seemed to blend with the wind. At first, I thought it was the wind itself, but the longer I listened, the clearer it became. There was a voice, faint but unmistakable, calling my name. Not my full name, just Jesse. It was soft, like it was trying to coax me out of my bed. I pulled the covers over my head and squeezed my eyes shut, hoping it would stop. But it didn't. It kept happening every night. I couldn't tell anyone. I knew they'd dismiss it. My parents were too busy enjoying the quiet to notice anything off about the place. They were happy, so I kept quiet too. But one morning, I couldn't stand it anymore. I was up before the sun, sneaking outside to explore the woods around the cabin. There was something about them, something that called to me. It was like the trees were alive, bending and shifting in ways that weren't normal. I wasn't sure why, but I needed to know more. Maybe I thought if I could find the source of the noise, it would stop. Maybe I just wanted to feel less crazy. The woods surrounding Black Hollow were thick, dense, the kind of trees that reach their branches over you and block out the light. There was a narrow trail leading deeper into the forest, one that seemed to get more and more overgrown the further you went. I followed it anyway, feeling my way through the underbrush, until I came upon something that made my stomach drop. It was a set of old footprints in the dirt. At first, I thought it was just some animal, maybe a bear or a wild boar, but they were too regular, too human, and they didn't look like they had been made recently, either. They were faded, the edges smudged, like they had been there for years. I bent down, tracing the outline with my fingers. The footprints led off the trail and into the trees, away from the cabin. I don't know why, but I followed them. Maybe I was trying to prove something to myself. Maybe I just needed to know. The footprints led me to a clearing where the trees broke apart, revealing an old, half-rotted structure. It wasn't a house? Exactly, more like the remnants of one. A shack, maybe, or an old storage shed. There was something off about it, though. The air around it felt heavier, like the air itself didn't want to be there. I approached slowly, heart hammering in my chest, and that's when I saw it. It wasn't just the shed, it was a grave. Or at least, that's what it looked like. There, half hidden in the dirt beside the crumbling structure, was a mound. Something had been buried there. Something fresh, or at least it looked like it. The dirt on top was disturbed, like someone had been digging. As I crouched down to get a closer look, the ground beneath me shifted, and a thin layer of dirt fell away, revealing a tattered leather-bound book. It wasn't a diary, not exactly, but it was full of names, dates, and strange symbols I didn't understand. I should have left it right there. I should have run back to the cabin and told my parents everything, but I didn't. Instead, I took the book, even though it felt wrong in my hands. As soon as I touched it, the whispers returned, louder this time, like the wind was speaking directly into my ears. I couldn't make sense of the book's contents, but there was one thing that kept appearing: the name Maggie. It was written on nearly every page, and every time it appeared, the text grew more erratic, more frantic, like whoever had written it was desperate. The last entry in the book was a scrawl of ink, barely legible, and it read, "The hollow calls for those who enter. Maggie waits for the lost." I didn't know what that meant, but I wasn't sticking around to find out. I shoved the book in my jacket and ran back to the cabin, my heart pounding. When I got back inside, my parents were already up, making breakfast. It was like nothing had happened, like I hadn't just unearthed something ancient and horrible. I wanted to tell them, I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. Instead, I spent the next few days pretending nothing was wrong. The whispers didn't stop, though. They only got worse. It wasn't until we were leaving that I finally found the courage to tell my mom what I'd found. I didn't tell her everything, just that I'd discovered a grave, that there was something off about the cabin, about the land. I thought maybe she'd take it seriously then, but she didn't. She just smiled and patted my head, saying it was all in my imagination. "You've been reading too many ghost stories, Jesse," she said. "Nothing's out there, except trees and critters." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to think I was just a kid, with too much time on her hands. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, following me. Maggie. Whoever she was, I knew she wasn't just in the past. She was waiting for me, waiting for someone else to stumble across the hollow. I don't know why, but I think I was always meant to find that book. A few months later, we got a letter. It was from the property manager who owned the cabin, a man who had been looking to sell it. In the letter, he mentioned that no one had stayed in that cabin for years. In fact, the cabin had been abandoned long before we ever got there. But what struck me the most was the last line. "If you happen to find any old books or items in the cabin, please return them to me. They were left there by the previous tenants." I never sent the book back. I still have it, hidden away in a box at the back of my closet. The whispers haven't stopped. Sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I can hear Maggie's voice again, calling me. It always says the same thing: "Come, Jesse, you're lost too." I don't know what happened to the family that lived there before us, but I'm sure it wasn't good. And now, I don't know what will happen to me either. I wish I could go back and leave everything behind, but I know I can't. Something in Black Hollow is waiting for me, and I don't think it's ever going to let me go. Before we jump into the next story, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. We really need your love and support. It means the world to us, and you're the reason this channel keeps going. Story number 2. We had been looking forward to this trip for months, just the two of us, escaping the chaos of everyday life, to celebrate a milestone in our marriage. I'd read reviews online about how perfect Cades Cove was for a romantic getaway, tucked away in the hills of Tennessee. The cabin was isolated, quiet, the kind of place where you could really unwind. What we didn't know was that it would be the place where everything changed. We'd arrived on a Friday evening, just as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the trees. The cabin was nestled at the edge of a clearing, barely visible from the narrow dirt road that led to it. It wasn't fancy by any means: rough-hewn wooden walls, a stone fireplace, some antique furniture, but it had that cozy charm, the sort of place you could easily imagine spending a weekend curled up together. We unpacked, made a simple dinner, and settled in front of the fire. Everything seemed fine, at first, but as the night wore on, something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it, but the silence was heavy. It wasn't just the stillness of nature around us, but something thicker, something in the air that made it hard to breathe, like the house itself was holding its breath. I chalked it up to the isolation. We were used to the bustle of city life, after all, and the stillness of the mountains might take some getting used to. That night, I woke up around 2 a.m. The room was cold, colder than it had been when we'd gone to bed, and the sheets felt damp against my skin. I glanced at my husband, Mark, who was sound asleep beside me. The fire had long since burned out, leaving the room in a kind of oppressive darkness. I tried to ignore the unease creeping through me, but then I heard its soft, muffled sounds, almost like whispering. I sat up, heart pounding in my chest. At first, I thought it was the wind outside, maybe the trees brushing against the window, but then the sound came again, more distinct this time. It was a voice, faint, low, almost like it was coming from the walls themselves. I nudged Mark, but he didn't stir. Maybe it was my imagination. It had to be. I told myself it was nothing, tried to lie back down, but the whispers grew louder, just on the edge of hearing. Panic twisted in my gut. I threw the covers off and crept out of bed, my bare feet cold against the wooden floor. The house was dark, but I could make out the dim shapes of furniture in the living room. My breath came out in shallow gasps, and I stood frozen for a moment, trying to make sense of what was happening. I tiptoed towards the hallway, the whispers louder now, growing clearer but still unintelligible. They seemed to be coming from the back of the cabin, near the guest room, where I knew there was an old wooden door that led into a small storage area. It had been locked when we arrived. I had assumed it was just a closet, but now something told me it wasn't just that. I was about to approach the door when I heard Mark calling from the bedroom. "Jess, what are you doing?" His voice was groggy, still half in sleep. I froze for a second, torn between the strange pull toward the door and the need to explain myself. But I didn't have an answer for him. So, I turned, muttering a half-hearted excuse about needing water, and made my way back to the room, my heart still thudding in my chest. The next morning, everything felt normal again, almost too normal. Mark was up early, already making coffee, and I tried to brush off the weirdness of the night before. We spent the day hiking, enjoying the beauty of the landscape, and by the time evening came again, I thought I was imagining things. But when we returned to the cabin, the air felt different once more. The oppressive heaviness was back, but this time, it was accompanied by a sense of foreboding, something deep in the pit of my stomach that I couldn't ignore. That night, as I sat on the couch by the fire, something caught my eye. A piece of paper, tucked underneath one of the armchairs. I don't know why I reached for it, but I did. Unfolding it, I found a letter written in a hurried, scrawled hand. It was dated 1989, 3 years before we arrived. The letter was addressed to someone named Sarah. It was only a few short lines, but they chilled me to the bone. "Sarah, if you find this, don't trust them. Don't stay in this cabin. It's not safe. I tried to leave, but it's too late. They're coming for you. Get out while you can." I stared at the letter, my hands trembling. Who had left this, and why? A sinking feeling settled in my stomach, and my thoughts raced. I showed it to Mark, but he just shrugged it off. "It's probably just something left behind by previous guests, Jess. People do weird things when they're out here by themselves," but I couldn't shake it. Something about that letter felt personal, like it was meant for me, like it had found its way into my hands for a reason. My mind spiraled as I tried to make sense of it all. I didn't want to sound paranoid, but the whispers, those voices I'd heard the night before, they had to be connected to this letter, right? Over the next few days, I kept to myself, avoiding Mark's questions about why I was always so distant. I couldn't stop thinking about the letter. It was like a dark cloud that hung over everything. I couldn't understand why I felt so drawn to the place, or why I was so terrified to leave. Then came the night that everything changed. We were sitting in the living room, Mark flipping through a magazine, and I was staring out the window, lost in thought. I noticed something out of the corner of my eye movement. A shadow, just outside the cabin. I stood up abruptly, heart racing. It wasn't a person, but it was moving, crawling along the ground. I ran to the door, flinging it open. There was nothing. The clearing around the cabin was empty, just the wind and the trees, swaying like they were alive. But as I turned back to the cabin, I saw it, an old portrait, hanging crookedly on the wall. I hadn't noticed it before. My breath hitched. The woman in the portrait was staring at me. Her eyes seemed to follow me, and I could swear she was smiling, a knowing, malicious smile that sent chills down my spine. I stumbled back, heart hammering in my chest. Mark, who had been behind me, looked at me with confusion. "Jess, what's wrong?" I couldn't answer. I just pointed at the portrait. Mark looked at it and then back at me, his face pale. It wasn't there before. I turned to him, desperation rising in my chest. "Mark, something is wrong here. I don't know how to explain it, but I feel like we're being watched, like we're trapped." Mark tried to calm me down, saying I was just stressed. Maybe the isolation was getting to me, but I knew it wasn't just that. The strange feeling in my chest, the way the shadows seemed to move on their own, the whispers that had gotten louder over the past few days, it wasn't in my head. It was real. Later that night, after Mark had fallen asleep, I couldn't lie there anymore. I had to know the truth. I went back to the storage area, the one I had been drawn to before, and forced open the door. The room was musty, filled with old furniture covered in dusty sheets. But one thing caught my eye, a small wooden box tucked into the corner. I opened it, and inside was more evidence, another letter. This one dated 1990. It was addressed to Sarah again. And it detailed the death of the previous tenant, a man named Thomas, who had been found hanging in the cabin just a year before. But the letter didn't stop there. It went on to say that Thomas had not died by suicide, as the authorities had ruled, but had been murdered by someone who had stayed in the cabin before him. Someone who was still out there. My blood ran cold. It all clicked together, the whispers, the portrait, the letter I'd found. The woman in the photo was Sarah, and she hadn't left the cabin like the letter had said. She had died here, just like Thomas. But why? What had happened in that cabin that made it so cursed, so dangerous? I didn't stay another night. I couldn't. Mark tried to convince me to stay, but I knew it was over. We left early the next morning, driving away from Cades Cove with no intention of ever returning. To this day, I still don't know what happened in that cabin. All I know is that someone was watching us. And if we had stayed just a little longer, I'm not sure either of us would have made it out. Story number 3. We should never have gone out there. I can still hear their voices, faint echoes, telling me I was being paranoid. That it was just a stupid camping trip. That there was no reason to be so uneasy. But I know what I felt, and what happened, what I saw. And you won't convince me otherwise. Not after everything that went down. It started as a weekend getaway. Some old college buddies, a few days in the woods, the kind of thing we'd done 100 times before, Stone Creek, West Virginia. A small place, so far out in the middle of nowhere that no one really bothered to go there unless they knew the land. But that's what drew us in, I guess, the isolation. We wanted to get away from everything. We thought we were just going to have some beers, tell stupid stories around a fire, and sleep under the stars. It was supposed to be peaceful. The first day was exactly what we expected. We set up our tents by the creek, laughed a lot, and talked about everything we'd done since graduation. Nothing unusual. It wasn't until we decided to venture deeper into the woods, that things started feeling off. There was a cabin. We stumbled upon it while walking along a narrow trail, just barely visible through the trees. It was old, the kind of place you would expect to find in a horror movie, fallen logs and overgrown grass all around it. One of the guys, Jack, said we should explore it, but I wasn't so sure. Something about it didn't sit right with me, you know? It wasn't just the dilapidated appearance. It was something more intangible. But the others, they were all for it. So, against my better judgment, I followed. The inside of the cabin was dark and smelled damp. We all spread out, poking through things like we owned the place. Most of it was just old furniture, a few broken windows, and remnants of someone's life left behind. A few pictures on the walls, some yellowing newspapers, that sort of thing. But there was one thing that caught my eye. In the corner, there was an old trunk. Something about it felt wrong, I can't explain it. But before I could take a closer look, someone yelled from the other room, "Hey, look at this!" It was Tyler, one of my friends. He had found a journal tattered and barely holding together. He flipped through the pages like it was some kind of treasure. "I don't know, man," I said, walking toward him. "That thing looks like it's been here for decades, maybe even longer." "But Tyler," he just grinned. "That's the point, right? This place is ancient. Let's see what it says." The others gathered around, and Tyler started reading aloud. The handwriting was shaky, like someone on the edge of losing their mind, and the words didn't help the unease I was already feeling. "The curse will never end. He watches us. We are trapped in the forest forever, bound by blood and death. The beast that comes when the sun falls will come for me, and he will come for you too, unless you leave. Leave before the night falls." Tyler chuckled nervously, but I could see the discomfort in his eyes. It was like that dark energy that had been hanging in the cabin was suddenly more real. Like something had shifted. "I'm getting out of here," I said, already heading for the door. The others followed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. That there was something watching us, even though I couldn't explain it. I tried to brush it off, chalk it up to the cabin's eerie vibe, but the hairs on my neck stood up and I kept glancing over my shoulder. It was dusk when we left the cabin. We made our way back to the creek, but the woods didn't feel the same. The sounds of birds and insects had quieted down, replaced by something else, a low growl. I thought I imagined it at first, but then I heard it again. A deep rumbling sound that echoed through the trees, making my blood run cold. I stopped in my tracks. "Did you hear that?" The blood. Others looked around, their faces turning serious. "Probably just a bear or something," Jack said, but his voice was shaky. But it wasn't a bear. We set up camp back near the creek, too close to the woods for my liking, but I was too exhausted to move the tents. We started a fire, and for a while, everything was fine. The laughter returned. We told stories, tried to pretend that nothing had happened. But then, around midnight, it happened. Tyler was the first to notice. He stood up suddenly, his eyes wide, staring into the trees. "Did you hear that?" he asked, voice tight with fear. At first, we all thought he was messing with us, but then we heard it too, something large, moving in the woods, something heavy. The sound of claws dragging through the underbrush, a dragging pace, like something was stalking us. "Is that a dog?" I whispered. The growl came again, but louder, closer. Then we saw it. It emerged from the shadows, its eyes glowing in the firelight. A massive black dog, bigger than any I'd ever seen. It had to be at least 6 feet long, with fur so black it looked like it swallowed the light. And those eyes, they weren't normal. They were bright, glowing, like there was something unnatural about them. "Holy shit!" Jack gasped. We froze. The dog didn't move. It just stood there, watching us. I don't know how long we stood like that. Minutes? Hours? It felt like time had stopped. My heart was pounding in my chest, my legs locked in place like I was rooted to the earth. The growling didn't stop, though. It just kept getting louder, deeper. Suddenly, Tyler turned and bolted. "Run!" he screamed. We didn't need any more convincing. We all took off, running through the woods, tripping over branches and roots. I didn't know where we were going, but I didn't care. I just had to get away from that thing. The growl grew closer, the sound of it chasing us, echoing in the night, and then silence. I glanced over my shoulder, breath coming in ragged gasps. The dog had stopped. It was like it had vanished, but it wasn't gone. Not by a long shot. Tyler was the first to scream. We turned to find him gone. Just gone. Vanished. No sign of him anywhere. No tracks. No blood. It was like he had been swallowed by the forest. We called his name, but there was nothing. Only the sound of the wind. Panic hit like a wave. We had to get out. We couldn't stay there. Not anymore, but we couldn't find our way back. The forest was disorienting, twisting, shifting like it had a mind of its own. It felt like we were going in circles. Time seemed to stretch. Hours passed, or maybe it was just minutes, but eventually, we stumbled upon the cabin again. It was like the forest had brought us back to it, like it had swallowed us whole. And that's when I understood. The dog wasn't just a dog. It was a part of something older, something that had been there long before we set foot in these woods. It was tied to the land, to the curse that the journal spoke of, the beast that guarded the forest. We couldn't leave. We couldn't escape. I don't know how we survived that night. We were lucky, I guess. We finally made it back to the creek, and by morning, the dog was gone. But the fear didn't leave us. Tyler was still missing. And to this day, I don't know what happened to him. Maybe he's out there, lost in those woods, running from something he couldn't outrun. I don't go into those woods anymore. Not even close. It's been years, but the memory is still fresh. I can still hear that growl, and I can still see those eyes. It was never just a dog. It was something worse. Something that shouldn't have been disturbed. And the curse? It's still out there. Story number 4. I don't know where to begin. It feels like I've been carrying this weight for years, and now, talking about it almost seems impossible. But it's real. It happened. And I don't think I can keep it inside anymore. Not after what I went through. I remember the first night I stayed in Dewey's cabin. It was one of those situations where I inherited a house from a distant relative. I didn't even know the woman that well. But when the lawyer called and told me she had left me this old cabin up in Ohio, I figured, why not? A little getaway, right? I could use it. At the time, it seemed like the perfect chance to escape the mess my life had become. A divorce, a job I hated, no real sense of where I was going. So, I drove up there alone. I wasn't expecting much, just a small, rustic place in the woods. It wasn't until I saw the cabin up close that I started to feel the first knot of unease. It wasn't anything obvious, but there was something about the way the trees loomed around it, almost as though they were standing guard. Still, I shrugged it off. Old houses are always a bit spooky, I thought. The place smelled musty when I stepped inside. Dust hung in the air, and the floors creaked under my weight as I moved around, opening windows and airing out the stale cabin. It wasn't much, but it had a charm to it. I unpacked my things and went about settling in, trying to shake off the odd feeling I couldn't quite place. There were a couple of pictures on the walls, mostly landscapes, nothing unusual. But then, I found something strange, an old family photo tucked inside a drawer. It was a picture of a woman I didn't recognize. She had dark eyes, and there was something off about the way she was smiling, like she was hiding something. It hit me then that was my relative, wasn't it? But why had she left me this place? Why did I get it when there were other people in the family who probably should have had a claim to it? But the thought passed quickly. I had my own issues to deal with, and if I was going to make this place my own, I needed to just get on with it. That night, I had my first dream. I was lying in bed, trying to sleep, but I couldn't get comfortable. My eyes kept drifting open, like someone was watching me. Then, it started. I didn't see the figure at first, but I felt it. I felt something standing over me, looming in the dark. Then, I saw it. A shadow, tall and thin, hovering at the foot of my bed. I couldn't move. My body was frozen, my throat tight. The figure didn't speak, didn't move. It just stood there. I wanted to scream, to get up, but all I could do was stare. When I woke up, I thought it was just a nightmare, maybe just my mind playing tricks. But the feeling lingered, and over the next few days, it didn't go away. I kept seeing flashes of that figure, standing in corners of my vision or out of the corner of my eye. Every time I turned around, it was like it was following me, just outside the reach of my sight. Then, the dreams started getting worse. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding in my chest. Sometimes, the figure would be at the foot of the bed. Other times, it would be standing in the doorway. Each night, it grew stronger, more real, until I couldn't tell what was a dream and what was reality. I tried to dismiss it. Maybe it was just the stress of being alone, or the isolation. I tried not to let it bother me, but it wasn't just the figure. There were other things. Small things at first. The sound of footsteps on the wooden floors when no one was around, a cold draft that would appear in the middle of the room, despite all the windows being closed. But I wasn't ready to admit to myself that something was wrong. I didn't want to believe it. So, I pushed on. One afternoon, while cleaning up in the cabin, I found an old box hidden in the floorboards under the rug. It was dusty, covered in cobwebs, but when I opened it, it was filled with old letters and papers. The handwriting was shaky, like it was written in a hurry. There were more photos, but these ones were different. The people in them looked afraid. There was one letter that caught my eye, and it sent chills down my spine when I read it. It was addressed to someone named Harold, and it spoke of a secret, something buried deep within the cabin walls. I couldn't stop myself. I kept reading, the letter growing more frantic as it went on. The last few lines made my stomach drop. They'll come for me if I don't hide it. The others will know. They'll find it, and I won't make it out. If they come for me, don't let them in. Don't let them in, or it's over for all of us. I sat there, my hands trembling as I reread the letter. I couldn't wrap my mind around it. It didn't make sense. Why would she have written this? And who was this Harold? The shadowy figure I'd been seeing? Maybe it was connected to this somehow. Maybe this was the same person, the same entity haunting me, tied to the very secrets the cabin had been hiding for so long. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I had to figure out what had happened to my relative, and why she'd left me this cabin. I went into town the next morning, hoping to find someone who knew more about Dewey's cabin. The woman at the gas station looked at me with a strange expression when I mentioned the cabin. "Dewey's place?" she asked, her voice tight. "That old thing's been empty for years. Been sitting there, collecting dust. Not many people even remember who lived there before you." I asked her about the last occupant, my relative, and she told me her name, Ethel Dewey. It sounded so familiar, but I couldn't place it. She gave me a few details, but then she hesitated, like she was unsure whether to keep talking. She was a quiet woman, the attendant said. Stayed mostly to herself. But there was talk. I talk about something strange. People said she got involved in things, dangerous things, never did figure out what. I could feel a knot tightening in my chest. I pressed her for more details, but the woman wouldn't say anything else. Something was off, and I could feel it in my bones. I returned to the cabin, my mind racing. The next few days were a blur. I kept having nightmares, but they were changing. Now, I wasn't just seeing the shadowy figure. I was hearing things, voices, low whispers, like they were coming from the walls. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't focus. I had to know what had happened. And that's when I found it. Behind the old wallpaper in the living room, there was a loose section of wood. I pried it open, my hands shaking. Inside, hidden in the wall, was a small compartment. and in that compartment was a box, locked tight. I broke the lock open, and what I found inside made my blood run cold. It was money, a lot of it, old bills, bound together with a rubber band. But that wasn't what shocked me. There was a letter inside, written in the same frantic handwriting as the one I'd found before. This one was even worse. It detailed the murder of someone named Harold, the man Ethel had been hiding. The letter described how Ethel had been forced to help him, that he had promised her safety in exchange for her silence. But the note ended with something even darker. If they come, don't trust the walls. They'll whisper lies. I don't know if it was the fear or the realization of what I was holding, but I froze. I couldn't move. The shadow I had been seeing, it wasn't just a ghost, it was real. And it was tied to whatever had happened in that cabin all those years ago. I didn't stay in the cabin that night. I left. I didn't know where to go, but I couldn't stay there. Not with that knowledge weighing down on me. As I drove away, I realized that the shadow wasn't just haunting me, it was following me, and it would never let me forget what I had uncovered. Which story setting scared you the most? Let me know in the comments. Story number 5. I don't know how to explain this, but I need to get it off my chest. I can't keep pretending like everything is fine, especially now that I'm starting to realize what really happened. Maybe if I tell you this, you'll believe me. Or maybe you'll just think I've lost my mind, but whatever, it doesn't matter. What matters is that I can't ignore it anymore. It started when we moved to Maple Hollow. A new start, you know? After the divorce, after everything went to shit, we needed somewhere to breathe. So, we packed up and found this secluded cabin in the woods, just my wife, my son, and me. It looked perfect, peaceful, quiet, exactly what we needed. The cabin was old, probably 100 years or more, but it had character. At least, that's what I thought at the time. The kind of place you can just sink into and forget about everything. But I was wrong. There was something wrong from the start. I was unpacking some boxes when I first heard it. My son, Jamie, was only 10 at the time. He wandered off to explore, as kids do. I didn't think anything of it, but after a while, I began hearing him muttering to himself in the cellar, his voice low and strange. I thought he was just playing, maybe imagining stuff. But when I went down to check on him, he wasn't playing at all. He was kneeling by the dirt floor, scratching at the ground with a small knife. His face was pale, like he'd seen something he couldn't understand. "What are you doing, Jamie?" I asked, trying to sound casual, but I could tell something was off. His eyes were wide, unfocused, like he was in a trance. "Daddy," he said in this flat, monotone voice, like he wasn't really speaking to me. "There's a man. He's under the floor. He's dead. He was buried here." I laughed it off. I did, because what else was I supposed to do? "Jamie, it's just an old house. You're imagining things, buddy." I grabbed him by the arm gently, trying to pull him away from tires. The spot. But he resisted, a strange tension building in him, like he wasn't really my son at that moment. He was just staring at that patch of floor. "No, Dad, he's under the floor. He wants to get out." I didn't want to believe him, not at first. I thought he was just reacting to the isolation. We had no neighbors for miles. The closest town was over 30 minutes away. It's not uncommon for kids to get stir-crazy in places like that. But after that day, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. It was like an itch in the back of my mind, always there, never going away. Over the next few days, Jamie grew more and more obsessed with that spot. He refused to leave the cellar, and when I tried to take him outside to play or show him around the property, he would just turn around and ask, "When will we fix the floor, Dad?" "The man is waiting." I told myself it was just a phase. Kids go through weird things, especially in new places. But then, things got stranger. One night, I woke up to the sound of footsteps coming from below. It was around 3 in the morning. My wife was asleep beside me, so I got up to check, thinking maybe Jamie had wandered off or something. When I opened the cellar door, the smell hit me first. a thick, musty scent like decay. I flicked on the light, and there he was, Jamie, kneeling exactly where he had been before, except this time he was holding something in his hands. I didn't get close enough to see what it was, but it wasn't a toy. It wasn't anything a child should be holding. "Jamie," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "what are you doing?" He looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw something in his eyes that made me freeze. It was like he wasn't there at all. "He wants to come out. He's angry. He's been waiting too long." I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I thought about dragging him away, but something inside me held back. I don't know why. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was curiosity. Whatever it was, it paralyzed me. "Let's get back upstairs," I said after a moment, my voice shaky. "We'll figure this out tomorrow, but for now, you need to come with me." Jamie didn't move. He just stayed there, his face expressionless. Then, in a quiet, almost reverent voice, he said, "You have to dig, Dad. You have to dig. The man's under the floor." I didn't know what to do. My son wasn't my son anymore. It was like he was possessed, like something was using him to communicate its presence. I finally got him back upstairs, but that night, I barely slept. I just lay there in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the silence. The next day, I couldn't shake the feeling that Jamie was right. Something was down there. I don't know why, but I decided to investigate. I know, it sounds insane, but I was desperate. I had to see it for myself. I took a shovel into the cellar and started digging. It was hot and uncomfortable, but I couldn't stop. Every time I hit a patch of dirt that felt a little too soft, I thought maybe I was getting closer. And then, after what felt like hours, the shovel hit something solid, something that wasn't just earth, something cold. I knelt down, heart pounding in my chest, and scraped away the rest of the dirt. When the object finally came into view, I froze. It was a wooden box, old and weathered, but the smell coming from it was indescribable. It wasn't the smell of wood or earth, it was something else, something wrong. I pulled the box out, shaking now, and forced myself to open it. Inside, I found the remains of a man. His bones were twisted in unnatural angles, his clothes rotted away to nothing, but his face was preserved somehow. His eyes were wide open, staring directly at me, as if he had been watching me all this time. I felt my stomach lurch. I couldn't breathe. I was choking on the air, but that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the note I found beside the body. It was written in a shaky, desperate hand, and it read, "I didn't want to die. They said I had to. They said if I didn't, they would come for me. They promised they'd come for me. They promised." I couldn't make sense of it. Who was this man? What had happened here? Then it hit me. I remembered something from when I was a kid. Stories my grandmother used to tell me about an old family feud that happened around the 1922nd, something that went down in these woods. I never paid much attention to it at the time, but now it made sense. The man in the box, the buried body, he had to be part of that. This was the cabin where it all happened, where everything went wrong. I ran upstairs, panic flooding through me, but when I opened the door to Jamie's room, I stopped dead in my tracks. He was standing by the window, staring out into the woods. His back was to me, but I could see his reflection in the glass. His face was twisted in a grotesque smile, one that wasn't his. "He's gone, Dad," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "The man's free now. He's coming for you." I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I grabbed Jamie and held him, but even then, I knew we weren't alone anymore. That night, I packed up everything. I didn't care about the cabin, or the house, or what was left behind. I just had to leave. I didn't even tell my wife the full story. I couldn't. She would never believe me. So we left. We never went back to Maple Hollow. But sometimes, when I close my eyes, I still see Jamie standing in front of that window, smiling that smile that wasn't his. And sometimes, late at night, I swear I can hear scratching. From somewhere deep beneath the earth. Story number 6. I still can't shake the feeling of being watched. It was the first night we arrived at the cabin, tucked away in the remote corners of Bloodstone Mountain, Georgia. The air felt different, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. You know when something's off, but you can't name it? That's how it was. We were supposed to have fun, a weekend getaway, to disconnect from work, to drink and laugh like we used to back in college. We'd rented this old cabin for the weekend, thinking it was just going to be like all the other trips we'd taken in the past. We were wrong. I'd only been in the cabin for about an hour when I noticed the silence. At first, I thought it was just the isolation, mountains and all that, but as I looked around, it felt like the silence was waiting for something. I tried to push it out of my mind, blaming it on too many late nights at the office. But then Ben started asking questions. "Do you guys feel that?" he said, looking up from his phone. Ben was always the curious one, the first to get spooked when something seemed off. The others laughed it off, but Ben's face looked like he'd seen something. His eyes were wide, and his skin was pale. "Feel what?" I asked, pushing my glasses back up my nose as I rummaged through the pantry. "The air, man. It's thick." He didn't finish the sentence, but I could see that he was already regretting bringing it up. Nina laughed. She was sitting by the window, scrolling through her Instagram. "You're being dramatic. It's just the mountain air. Relax." But Ben wasn't so easily distracted. He kept looking over his shoulder, as if he was expecting someone or something behind him. I couldn't help but glance over at him every now and then, watching as his paranoia slowly crept into his expression. By nightfall, I knew something wasn't right. Maybe it was the shadows, or maybe it was the way the wind moved through the trees, but the cabin felt like it was breathing with us. I didn't say anything, though. What would I say? "Hey guys, I think this place is haunted?" No, I just tried to brush it off. We gathered around the fireplace, cracking open the beers and talking about anything and everything, trying to ignore the nagging feeling that something was watching us from the woods outside. Ben was quiet, though. He didn't even join in the conversation, just sat there with his eyes darting to the door every few minutes. "We should go hiking tomorrow," Nina suggested, trying to get the energy back up, but I could tell by the look on her face that she wasn't all that comfortable either. She just didn't want to be the first one to admit it. "Yeah, sure," I said, offering a forced smile. "We'll go hiking. We'll have fun. It's just a cabin in the woods. Nothing weird about it." But I couldn't shake the feeling. Something was wrong. Every time I looked out the window, I thought I saw something moving in the trees, a shadow that didn't belong, but when I blinked, it was gone. Maybe I was just overtired. Maybe Ben's unease was rubbing off on me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing noises from the woods, twigs snapping, distant rustling, like someone or something was walking around the cabin. I tried to ignore it, thinking it was just animals, maybe a raccoon or a deer, but the sounds kept coming, until I finally gave in and got out of bed to check the locks on the doors and windows. That's when I saw something that froze me in my tracks. The woods were empty, but the moonlight illuminated something strange in the distance, what looked like a figure standing just inside the tree line. A person, but they didn't move. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, but then I saw it shift. No, not a trick. Someone was standing there, watching the cabin. I didn't scream, but my heart nearly exploded in my chest. I backed away slowly, not wanting to alert whoever or whatever it was. I couldn't wake the others. They'd think I was overreacting, and maybe I was. But the figure didn't move. It just stood there. I'm not sure how long I stared at it before I finally couldn't take it anymore and ran back to my room. I lay in bed for hours, staring at the ceiling, but the figure never left my mind. When morning came, I tried to act normal, but the others could tell I wasn't myself. "You look like you saw a ghost?" Nina teased, but I could tell by the look on her face that she was just as unsettled as I was. I didn't sleep well, I said, hoping to brush it off. Let's just go for that hike. We set out into the mountains shortly after breakfast, trying to push our discomfort aside. We didn't talk much. The forest felt different, thicker, denser. The trees seemed to close in on us, and every step felt like it was leading us deeper into something we couldn't escape. We made our way down a narrow trail, and it wasn't long before we reached a small clearing. That's when we found it, the old stone circle. It was like something out of a history book, the rocks arranged in a perfect ring, weathered by time but still imposing. The air grew colder as we stepped closer. "What the hell is this?" Ben asked, his voice shaky. He had been in a similar spot before, but something was different this time. I saw the way he looked at the rocks, like they were alive. "That's not normal," Nina said, stepping back, clearly uncomfortable. I felt it too, like the ground itself was vibrating beneath us. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming now, and I couldn't shake the sense that we had stumbled upon something that wasn't meant to be discovered. "We should leave," I said. "Now." But Ben didn't want to leave. He was drawn to the circle, his eyes fixated on something I couldn't see. "Ben, stop," I said, grabbing his arm. But he shrugged me off. He stepped into the trees, the center of the circle. That's when things started going wrong. The sky darkened in an instant, and the air grew thick, almost suffocating. We tried to call out to Ben, but no sound came from our mouths. The earth beneath us seemed to tremble, and then a voice low and guttural spoke from the trees. "We warned you," it whispered, so softly it was barely audible. "Now you will pay." Ben's eyes widened, and before we could stop him, he collapsed to his knees. Something invisible seemed to drag him deeper into the circle, and we could only watch as he screamed, his body contorting unnaturally. I ran to him, but it was too late. The moment I touched him, I felt the coldness of death in my bones. Ben's body went limp in my arms. His eyes were wide open, but they were empty. There was nothing there anymore. We fled from the circle, running back through the woods, but it was as though the forest had transformed into something else. We couldn't find the path, couldn't hear anything except for the sound of our own ragged breathing. When we finally made it back to the cabin, we were breathless, hysterical. We called the police, but by the time they arrived, there was nothing to be found. Ben's body was gone. The circle was gone. The forest was still. It was as though we had imagined it all. But I know what I saw, and I'll never forget the look in Ben's eyes when he disappeared. That night, the air was thick again, and I could hear that same voice in the wind. The spirits were watching, and they weren't finished with us. I don't know how I made it out of there alive, but I did. We all did, except for Ben. Now, every time I hear a whisper in the woods, I think of that day. I think of the circle, the figure in the distance, and the voices that will never leave me. And I know, deep down, that Bloodstone Mountain isn't done with me yet. Story number 7. I should have known something was wrong when I first saw the fog. It was subtle at first, just a thin veil creeping up the sides of the mountain. But by the time I reached the cabin, it had thickened to the point where I could barely see more than a few feet in front of me. I wasn't worried, though. I needed the solitude, the quiet. I needed to clear my head, get away from the noise of everything, my life, my work, my constant struggle with myself. That was the whole point of the trip, right? To reset. The cabin itself was isolated. I wasn't sure how the owners could even get out here when the weather turned bad. The gravel road that led to the front door was barely wide enough for a single car, winding its way through the pines like something out of an old horror movie. But there I was, finally alone, after months of feeling trapped in my own skin. I locked the car, grabbed my bag, and made my way up to the cabin's porch. The door was old, creaking slightly as I pushed it open. Inside, it smelled of wood and dust, as if no one had been there for ages. There was no phone signal, No Wi-Fi, no distractions. Just me, the cabin, and the ever-encroaching fog. I walked in, took a deep breath, and let out a sigh I hadn't realized I'd been holding. I should have stayed at the door. But curiosity got the best of me, like it always does. I wandered deeper into the cabin, dragging my suitcase along the wooden floor. The space was cozy enough, if not a little rundown. A few old chairs, a fireplace that looked like it had been used in years, a small kitchen, and a staircase that led to a loft bedroom. It wasn't much, but it was perfect for what I needed: isolation. By the time I unpacked and set myself up in the bedroom, the fog had thickened even more. It was like it was alive, crawling up the sides of the cabin, pushing through the windows. I pulled the curtains shut, but the fog was relentless. It seeped through the cracks, a cold breath against my neck, making the cabin feel like a prison. I tried to shake off the uneasy feeling gnawing at me. "It's just the fog," I muttered to myself, but something felt off. The air was too thick, too heavy, as if it was holding something just beneath the surface. I told myself it was the isolation, that I hadn't spent enough time alone in years, but the feeling persisted. I made myself a cup of tea, sat down on the couch by the fireplace, and tried to relax. But no matter what I did, I couldn't get the sense of being watched out of my mind. I glanced around the room, half expecting to see someone standing there, but there was no one, of course, just the fog pressing against the windows. The silence felt oppressive. And yet, there was a noise, too. A whispering. At first I thought it was the wind, but it wasn't. It was a voice, low, familiar. I couldn't make out the words at first, but the more I listened, the clearer it became. It was my voice, my own voice, murmuring to me, telling me things I wasn't ready to hear. I froze. My heart hammered in my chest. The voice was coming from the walls, from the very air around me. I stood up, my hands shaking, and rushed to the window. I pulled back the curtain, expecting to see something, anything. But there was nothing, just the fog, thick and suffocating, like a living thing that wanted to pull me in and never let go. I stepped away from the window, my breath coming faster now, my mind racing. I needed to leave, I needed to get out, but every instinct I had told me that running was futile. The fog was everywhere. The whispering grew louder, and I realized it wasn't just my voice anymore. There were others too, echoes from the past, words I had heard before, in different places, at different times. "You'll never be enough. They'll never accept you. You'll always be alone." I felt my knees go weak, and I collapsed onto the couch, covering my ears. But the voices didn't stop. They only grew. Louder, more insistent, more real. The fog was inside the cabin now, curling around my feet, wrapping around my body like an invisible chain. That's when I saw it. A figure. Standing at the base of the stairs, just beyond the edge of the fog. At first, I thought it was my mind playing tricks on me. But no, there was someone there. A shadow, watching me. I stood up, my legs trembling. The figure didn't move. It was still, just watching. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. My throat was dry, like the air itself was choking me. I took a step toward it, my heart pounding in my chest. I had to see who it was, had to know if it was real. But the closer I got, the more the fog seemed to close in around me. The figure remained motionless, its face hidden in the shadow. The whispers, my voice, grew louder still, drowning out everything else. "Come closer," the voice urged. "Come see what you've done." I hesitated, my pulse racing, but then something inside me snapped. I had to know. I couldn't run from it anymore. I had to face it. I stepped forward, my breath ragged, and as I reached the base of the stairs, the figure moved. It was no longer a shadow. It was me, but not me, a version of me I didn't recognize. The figure was different, older, worn. There was a sadness in its eyes, a kind of deep, unshakable sorrow that pierced right through me. It wasn't just a reflection of me. It was every failure, every mistake I had made, every fear I had buried deep inside me. It was all of the things I couldn't face, all of the things I had pushed away for so long. "You've been hiding from yourself," it whispered. "You can't run anymore." I took a step back, my heart racing. "No," I said, my voice shaking. "This isn't real. You're not real." But it didn't go away. It just stood there, staring at me with eyes that knew too much. I turned and ran, up the stairs, into the bedroom. But the fog followed me, the whispers followed me, the figure followed me. I slammed the bedroom door shut and locked it. But the air in the room was suffocating now, thick with the fog. I could barely breathe, my chest tightening, the walls closing in. It was as if the fog itself was trying to drown me, to swallow me whole. And then I understood. It wasn't the fog that was the threat. It was me. My own mind, my own fears. I had spent so much of my life hiding from who I was, from the things that terrified me the most. The fear of never being enough, the fear of never being accepted, the fear that I would always be alone. The fog wasn't just a storm outside. It was a storm inside my head, and I had to face it. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and let the fog wash over me. It pressed against me, cold and relentless. But this time, I didn't fight it. I let it come. I let it envelop me, because I knew now that the only way to survive it was to stop running. The fog faded slowly, dissipating, until there was nothing left but silence. I opened my eyes, and the figure was gone. I stood there, in the quiet, the fog now just a memory. It was over. I was still here, and for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. The voices were gone. The fear was gone. The cabin, the fog, it all felt like a dream, like something I had to endure to finally understand what I had been running from all this time. The rest of the night was calm. The fog cleared completely by morning, and when I woke up, the sun was shining through the windows. I packed my things, ready to leave. But before I did, I looked one last time at the place where the figure had stood. I knew I wasn't the same person who had arrived here. The fog had forced me to confront the darkest corners of my mind, but it had also set me free. I left that cabin behind, but the lesson stayed with me. Story number 8. I never believed in ghosts. I always thought people who talked about hauntings were just looking for attention, trying to rationalize things they couldn't explain. That was before Widow's Hollow, before I spent months in that cabin, before I saw her. I remember the first night like it was yesterday. It was one of those moments you can't forget, the kind that shapes you in a way you'll never be the same again. I wasn't expecting anything, nothing out of the ordinary anyway. I just needed a break. The house we lived in after John died had too many memories. Every corner seemed to breathe his presence. So, when the cabin came up, tucked away in some forgotten hollow in Pennsylvania, I thought it'd be the perfect place to heal. The isolation was supposed to help me breathe again, let me figure out how to be myself without him. The first week was uneventful, the silence peaceful. No city noise, no distractions, just the wind in the trees and the occasional distant crow. It should have been a comfort, but it never felt like one. The air had a heaviness to it that I couldn't shake. Still, I kept telling myself it was nothing, just the grief making everything feel wrong. I should have known from the first night. When I laid in bed, the quiet was almost too loud. The kind of quiet that gets into your bones and makes everything feel stretched, like something was about to break. Around 2 a.m., I woke up suddenly, my breath caught in my throat. At first, I couldn't remember why. There was no sound, no movement, but something was there, something I couldn't name. I sat up, listening. The room was still, except for a faint scratching sound. It came from the wall near the foot of the bed. It wasn't a rat, or at least it didn't sound like one. It was slower, more deliberate. I got out of bed, heart hammering, and pulled the covers back to look at the wall. There was nothing. Of course there was nothing. But that scratching didn't stop. It continued for what felt like hours, dragging along the wood like fingernails on a chalkboard. It grew louder. I tried to tell myself it was just a tree branch scraping against the wall outside. But I knew it wasn't. It was too close. Too inside. My fingers were shaking as I reached for the light, flicking it on and off, but nothing helped. The sound only seemed to get louder the longer I stayed in the room. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I threw on my robe and walked out of the cabin. The cool air hit me, and for a second, it cleared my mind. I thought maybe I was just losing my grip on reality. Grief does strange things to you, makes you hear things, see things. The night wrapped around me like a shroud, and I thought I could just walk it off. But I didn't go far. Just as I was about to turn back, I noticed it. The small wooden structure at the edge of the trees. I hadn't seen it before. It wasn't visible from the cabin, hidden behind the thick brush. I should have turned around, gone back to the warmth of my bed. But something compelled me to walk toward it, drawn in by the curiosity I couldn't shake. As I got closer, the air felt different, heavier. I hesitated at the door, my hand hovering over the rusted handle. Something in my gut twisted. But then the door creaked open, as if it were waiting for me. Inside, the air was thick, stale with the smell of mold and decay. But that wasn't what made my stomach drop. It was the photograph, framed, hanging crookedly on the wall. A woman. She was smiling, but it was the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. I felt an icy chill run down my spine. I couldn't explain why, but I knew it was her. The woman in the picture was dead. The cabin felt like it had been frozen in time, as if she was still here, waiting. I backed away from the photograph, my mind racing. It wasn't just the picture. The entire cabin felt wrong. Something about it felt familiar. I left. The next morning I didn't tell anyone about it. I convinced myself it was just my imagination, nothing more than a trick of the dark. But the dreams started that night. They were subtle at first. Soft whispers, like someone calling my name from the edge of sleep. Then, the nightmares. They weren't just dreams, though. They felt like memories, like I was living someone else's life. In the dreams, I saw her, the woman from the photograph. Her life seemed to play out in front of me, like a movie. She had been happy, once, but then, something had changed. She was alone, isolated, like me. But she wasn't just lonely, she was terrified. I couldn't make sense of it. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, my heart racing, only to fall asleep again and feel her presence, like she was there in the room with me. The dreams became more vivid, more real, and the scratches returned. Always at night, always from the walls. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know. So I went back to the cabin in the woods, the one I'd seen that first night. I had to figure out what had happened there, what was pulling me back. When I opened the door this time, the stench of rot hit me harder. The photo was still there, but this time, something had changed. The woman's smile had shifted, just slightly, to something darker, as if she knew I was coming. I stepped closer, my heart pounding. My eyes scanned the cabin. That's when I saw it. The floorboard near the corner had been disturbed. It was warped, slightly raised. I didn't want to touch it, but I had no choice. I pulled it up, my hands shaking. Beneath it, there was a letter, yellowed and fragile. I unfolded it with trembling fingers, and the words hit me like a punch to the gut. It was a confession. The woman, her name was Margaret. Margaret, who had come to Widow's Hollow years ago with her husband, the same as I had. But Margaret's story wasn't the same as mine. She hadn't been left to grieve. She had been murdered. Her husband had killed. They had covered it up, made it look like an accident. And his family had helped him. They had buried her secret, hidden it in the cabin, left her spirit to linger. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at that letter. But when I heard the noise again, the scratching, coming from behind me, I knew it wasn't just Margaret, it was him. her husband. He was still there, his presence lingering like a dark stain. I could feel him, like a weight on my chest, pressing down on me. The air was suffocating now. The temperature dropped, and I could hear footsteps, slow, deliberate, as if someone was walking toward me. I turned, heart in my throat, and there he was. The figure of a man, indistinct but solid. He was staring at me with cold eyes, eyes that didn't belong to a living person. That was when I ran. I don't remember how I got back to the cabin. I don't remember the walk, the panic, the sound of my heart hammering in my chest. All I remember is that I didn't stop running. I didn't look back. I packed my things that night. I left Widow's Hollow without a second thought, without a goodbye to the cabin or the memories I thought I'd find there. I knew then that some ghosts can never be laid to rest. Some stories can't be buried in the past, no matter how hard you try. Margaret's spirit hadn't been the only one tied to that place, neither had her husband's. I had become part of their story. Whether I liked it or not, I never went back. But I know she's still there. I can feel her in the quiet sometimes, in the moments when I least expect it. And whenever I hear a scratching sound in the distance, my heart still skips a beat. Story number 9. I was skeptical, at first, when Sarah suggested the idea. A weekend getaway in a secluded cabin in the woods of Broken Pines, Arkansas? I thought it sounded like the perfect opportunity to unplug, escape the noise of our busy lives, and just get some peace. What I didn't expect was how quickly that peace would turn into something else. Something I still don't fully understand. It was late in the evening when we first heard the knocks. At first I thought it was just the wind. The cabin was old, and it creaked a lot. But this was different. It sounded like someone was tapping lightly on the window, right next to our bed. I wasn't sure if Sarah heard it at first. She was already half asleep when the knocking started. But when it happened again, I sat up, confused, staring into the dark room. The room felt colder suddenly. It wasn't a chill from the outside. This was something else. Something in the air, thick and wrong. "Did you hear that?" I whispered to Sarah, my voice barely a breath. She stirred but didn't open her eyes. "It's probably nothing," she mumbled, rolling over. I didn't want to push it. After all, we had just arrived, and I didn't want to ruin the mood. But the sound was so clear, so intentional. Not the wind, not the house settling. It was knocking. 2 distinct taps. I knew it. Slowly, I slid out of bed, careful not to wake Sarah. I stood for a moment, staring at the window. The trees outside swayed in the wind, but nothing moved near the cabin. I couldn't understand it. I grabbed my phone, shining the flashlight over to the window. Nothing was there. No shadow, no person. Just the trees, standing still, as though the night had frozen. I stood there for a long time, trying to reason with myself, trying to convince myself that it was just my imagination. Then, the knocking came again. 3 taps this time. Harder, louder. My heart raced. I reached for Sarah again, shaking her this time. "Sarah, wake up!" She opened her eyes slowly, groggy. "What's going on? Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice shaking now. She blinked and glanced at the window. The knocking stopped as soon as she focused on it. Her eyes narrowed. "No," she said, her voice uncertain. "Maybe you were dreaming?" I shook my head. I wasn't dreaming. I knew what I heard. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The house felt off. The air, thick and heavy. I could feel it pressing in on me. My fingers trembled as I reached for the light switch, flipping it on. The room illuminated, but it didn't feel right. It was still cold, and the energy felt different. "I'm going to check it out," I said, my voice hoarse. I wasn't sure what I was expecting to find, but I needed to do something. Sarah grabbed my wrist before I could leave the room. "Don't go out there alone," she said, fear creeping into her voice. "Stay here, then, just in case." Reluctantly, she nodded, and I stepped into the hallway, flashlight in hand. The house creaked beneath my feet, every sound amplified in the quiet. As I moved down the hallway, the knocking began again, this time from a different window on the far side of the house. I froze. This wasn't possible. I hadn't heard anyone walk past. There was no way anyone could be outside. I went to the window closest to the noise, my flashlight sweeping the area outside. Nothing. No sign of movement, just the trees standing still against the night sky. But the air was heavier now, suffocating almost. I felt watched. My skin crawled. I turned to go back to Sarah when I saw something. A shadow, barely noticeable, just at the edge of the beam of my flashlight. It moved quickly, like a person darting from one tree to another. But when I focused, there was nothing there. No one. I rubbed my eyes, trying to clear the fog that had settled in my mind, but the feeling of being watched grew stronger. I returned to the bedroom, feeling like I couldn't breathe properly. Sarah was still sitting up in bed, waiting for me. She was pale, her eyes wide with concern. "What happened?" she asked. "What did you see?" "I don't know," I said, trying to catch my breath. I think someone's out there." But when I looked, there was nothing. "I swear, it's like something's playing with us." She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she stared at the window across from us, the curtains drawn tightly. There was something about her gaze, something almost haunted. I knew she wasn't just worried about the noise. She was scared, deep down. "Let's lock the door," she said quietly, "just in case." I agreed. We locked the door, double-checked the windows, and tried to settle back down. But the knocks didn't stop. They came again, this time louder, harder, like fists against the glass. By then, I was too terrified to stay still. The energy in the room had changed completely. It was oppressive, like the walls were closing in on us. I could feel it, a presence, something dark and old. "Something's not right, Sarah," I said, my voice trembling. She didn't answer. She was staring out the window again. Her face was pale, eyes wide in disbelief. I followed her gaze. The trees outside were still, but something was off. There was a flicker of movement near the tree line, too quick to catch clearly. It wasn't an animal. It was too deliberate, too human. We heard the knock again, but this time, it wasn't on the window. It was behind us, coming from the door. I turned to Sarah. She was crying now, her hands shaking. "I don't want to stay here," she whispered. "We can't leave. It's too late now," I said, my throat dry. "We have to find out what this is, what it wants." We were both terrified. But I knew we had to confront whatever this was. I couldn't leave without knowing what was happening to us. As I moved towards the door, I felt it, a shift in the air. Something cold and thick, pressing against me like a hand on my chest. It was there, in the room with us, breathing, watching. My pulse raced. I could hear it now, breathing, deep and labored. "Who's there?" I demanded. My voice cracked, but I didn't care. I was desperate to understand what was going on. There was no answer. But the door shook, like someone was pushing against it from the other side. Suddenly, the room grew darker. The light flickered, and then went out completely, leaving us in pitch-black darkness. Panic set in. I couldn't see, couldn't think. I fumbled around, trying to find my phone, my flashlight. But everything felt off, wrong. My head was spinning. Then, in the darkness, we heard it again. A voice. "Leave. This place. Now." It was a whisper, a rasping breath, right behind me. My heart nearly stopped. I turned quickly, but nothing was there. Just the oppressive dark. "We're not alone," Sarah sobbed, clutching my arm. A chill ran through me. I knew it was true. Whatever was here wasn't just trying to scare us. It was trying to get rid of us. The knocking came again, but this time it wasn't just at the windows or the door. It was everywhere, all around us. It was relentless, pounding like a drum. I could feel it now, the presence in the room. Cold, ancient, filled with rage. I don't know how long we stood there, paralyzed by fear, but eventually, the knocking stopped. The room went deathly silent. The air felt thicker than ever, and then, I heard it. Help me. It wasn't a whisper. It wasn't a voice at all. It was a plea, desperate, raw, and I knew it wasn't meant for us. It was meant for whoever was trapped in this house, trapped by whatever had been knocking, whatever had been haunting us. A sudden clarity hit me. This wasn't just a ghost. It was something else, something that wanted to keep us here, in the dark. The spirit of whoever had died here was trying to protect us. It was trying to warn us. The entity, whatever it was, had already claimed others before us. We couldn't stay here. We had to leave, and the only way to do that was to banish it, to rid this place of its grip. I didn't know how we'd do it, but the thought of staying any longer was unbearable. Without a word, I grabbed Sarah's hand. Together, we made our way out of the cabin, into the dark woods, running as fast as we could. We didn't stop until we reached the nearest town, miles away from that cursed cabin. We never went back. I don't know what happened to that place. But I do know one thing. Sometimes, the things that haunt us are older than we can imagine, and they don't ever let go easily. Story number 10. It's hard to describe the feeling of dread that clings to you, gnawing at your stomach after something happens that you can't explain. It's even harder to convey the raw terror that comes from the relentless question, what did I just experience? This story starts with a choice I thought would heal me and my daughter, a cabin in the middle of nowhere to help us reconnect after the disaster of our divorce. I had no idea then that it would drag me into something much darker. It was early autumn when I decided to take Natalie on this trip. She was 14, angrier than I knew how to handle, and we hadn't been able to have a normal conversation in months. I thought maybe a weekend in the Missouri wilderness would bring us closer. We rented a small cabin called Willow Springs, just outside of town, far enough to make you forget about the noise of real life. When I checked in at the tiny town's only shop, the woman behind the counter seemed unusually eager to give me directions. She was older, silver hair pulled back in a tight bun, and her eyes, I couldn't quite place it, but she was staring at me like she knew something I didn't. "Don't go to the woods after dark," she said, her voice heavy, serious. I laughed it off, thinking it was some local superstition. People always tell stories about the woods, right? They have this way of playing on your nerves, especially if you're from the city. She gave me a long look, one that made me uneasy, then went back to her routine. When we arrived at the cabin, I felt something, but I couldn't say exactly what. The air felt thick, pressing against me, like the weight of something unseen was watching. Natalie didn't seem bothered, though. She was on her phone, texting who knows who, and I was just relieved she wasn't fighting me over the trip. The first night was quiet. I remember sitting at the small wooden table, eating microwavable dinners, trying to make conversation with her, but we both just picked at our food. When I offered to go for a walk, she shrugged, and I let her be. I went outside alone, hoping the fresh air would clear my head. The moonlight barely made it through the trees, and the night felt endless. It was around 9:30 p.m. when the knock came at the door. It was an old woman, hunched over, with a walking cane in her hand. Her eyes were wide and unblinking, like she had been standing there for hours, waiting. She didn't look lost, but there was something unsettling about the way she held herself. "Evening," she said, her voice raspy. "I'm Mrs. Bradley. I live just down the hill. Wanted to make sure you're settling in all right." I nodded, feeling awkward. "Yeah, everything's fine. Thanks for checking in." Her eyes narrowed for a moment, and then she smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was like she was trying too hard. "Don't let the woods fool you, son. People think the trees are friendly, but they're not. They have a way of holding on to things. If you're smart, you'll stay inside once the sun sets." Just a bit of advice, from someone who knows. I chuckled, trying to ease the tension. "Yeah, we'll be careful, thanks." But she didn't leave. Instead, she stood there, still staring at me, almost like she expected something from me, something I wasn't willing to give. "I know what happened here," she muttered, her gaze flickering to the cabin behind me. "The deaths, they're still here, lingering. So are the ones who left." Her voice dropped to a near whisper. "You should leave before it's too late." I stared at her, unsure if she was just a local eccentric or something else entirely. "I think we'll be fine. Thanks for the warning, though." Without another word, she turned and hobbled back down the trail, disappearing into the trees, her footsteps eerily silent on the soft dirt. I didn't sleep well that night. The house creaked, settling with the cold, and the wind outside howled through the trees, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It was like every sound in the woods was magnified. Every movement outside felt deliberate, like something was waiting. By morning, I convinced myself I was being paranoid. It was just the isolation, the unfamiliar surroundings. I made breakfast for Natalie, trying to keep things light, but she barely touched her food. I didn't blame her. I was still thinking about the woman, Mrs. Bradley, and what she had said. Something about it didn't sit right with me, but I didn't want to make a bigger deal out of it than it was. We spent the day exploring the nearby trails, but as the sun started setting, I realized how quickly the light faded in those woods. I didn't want to be caught out there when it was dark. Natalie, of course, didn't want to listen. She begged me to go on one last trail, one just a little deeper into the woods. I tried to argue, but she insisted, so we went. Big mistake. The trees began to close in as we ventured further, the air thickening again. The mood changed in an instant, and something inside me felt off, like we were walking into something that wasn't meant to be disturbed. I glanced over at Natalie, but she was too busy snapping pictures to notice. That's when we heard it. A sound, distant at first, like whispering. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it seemed to be coming from all directions at once. I stopped walking, trying to pinpoint the source, but all I could hear was that unnerving, whispering. "Dad, did you hear that?" Natalie asked, her voice trembling. I nodded, swallowing hard. "Yeah, stay close." We started to turn back, but as we did, the whispering grew louder, more frantic, until it felt like someone was right next to us. I looked around, panic starting to rise in my chest, but there was nothing. No one. Just the wind shaking the trees. Then, through the trees ahead of us, I saw her. Mrs. Bradley. Standing still, watching us, like she had been waiting. She wasn't moving, just standing there in the shadows, her eyes glowing unnaturally in the dark. "Go back," she called to us, her voice sounding strangled, like she was fighting something. "It's too late." Before I could respond, the ground beneath us shifted, like something deep below was moving. Natalie screamed as the earth trembled, and the ground split open at our feet, revealing a dark, black pit. I grabbed her and pulled her back just in time, heart hammering in my chest. I looked up again, but Mrs. Bradley was gone, vanished into the woods. We ran back to the cabin, terrified, breathless, the whispering still ringing in my ears. When we made it inside, I locked the door and sat Natalie down, trying to calm her, but I was just as scared as she was. I didn't know what we had just encountered, but I knew it wasn't something that could be ignored. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, thinking about Mrs. Bradley's words, her cryptic warning. Something had happened here, something terrible, and I had to know what. The next morning, I ventured into town, hoping to find some answers. When I asked around, no one seemed to know much about the cabin or its history, but the more I pressed, the more I learned about a string of deaths tied to that very place. People had died in mysterious ways, some suicides, some disappearances, and the rumors were always the same. The land was cursed, haunted by the souls of those who had met untimely ends. I found a local historian, an old man who had lived in the area his whole life. When I told him where I was staying, his face went pale. "You're not the first to ask about that place," he said, his voice low. "A lot of people avoid it. That cabin's seen more tragedy than most can bear. Every time someone tries to stay, something happens. They never come back the same. Or worse, they disappear altogether." The old man told me of the Prustred by the Faps, the land's tragic history, of a family that once lived in that cabin, wiped out in a brutal, unsolved murder. It was said their spirits still roamed, tormenting anyone who dared to live there. By the time I returned to the cabin, I knew the truth. Mrs. Bradley had been right. The curse was real. And I had brought Natalie into it. I packed up everything, leaving without a moment's hesitation. As we drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror, but the cabin was already fading into the distance. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching, waiting for us to make one last mistake. We never spoke about that trip again, not directly. But there was always a quiet understanding between me and Natalie. Sometimes, I catch her looking out the window, lost in thought, and I wonder if she still hears the whispers too. Story number 11. I didn't think it would end like this, sitting here telling you this, but I have to. It's the only way I can make sense of everything that happened at Cedar Branch. You remember when we decided to rent that cabin up in Maine, right? It was the perfect way to kick back after finals. A weekend getaway, away from all the stress, away from the city. Just us, a few beers, and some time in nature. We were naive, all of us. We didn't know what we were really getting into. The cabin was quaint. Too quaint, in hindsight. It was the kind of place you'd see in a postcard, with its rugged, old-school charm. But the moment we arrived, something felt off. It was like the cabin had an energy to it, something heavy that none of us could quite place. Still, we pushed it aside. I mean, who wouldn't? It was a break. We settled in and started exploring the place. Everyone was stoked to be away from campus, to finally get a breath. But it was when I went upstairs into that little room off to the side that I first found something that gave me a strange chill. It wasn't even the room itself, but the dusty journal sitting on the windowsill, half hidden behind a few old crates. I remember picking it up absent-mindedly, brushing off the dust, and flipping through it. It seemed like something from another time, this old, leather-bound journal. The pages were yellow, brittle almost, but the handwriting was still legible. As I read, I began to feel this creeping sensation at the back of my mind, like I was reading something I shouldn't. I wasn't the only one who felt it. Sarah, you know, the one who'd always joke about being the skeptic, said something was off about the whole place when we all sat down for drinks later. She couldn't put her finger on it either. "It's like we're being watched," she said. The others laughed it off, but I couldn't shake that feeling. I didn't want to tell them about the journal yet. It seemed too strange, too personal. So, I shoved the thing back in the corner, making a mental note to take another look later. The night went on, and things seemed fine at first. We had dinner, drank a little too much, and everyone went off to their rooms. But that's when I started hearing it. A sound, faint at first, like scratching. I brushed it off, thinking it was just the wind or the house settling. But the noise didn't stop. It came from the ceiling, above my head. Slow, rhythmic scratching, like something or someone was up there, just beyond my reach. I tried to ignore it, but I couldn't. It gnawed at me. Eventually, I just lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, hoping I was imagining it. The next morning, I tried to act like everything was fine, but I couldn't shake the feeling. I didn't tell the others about the noise. Instead, I found myself staring at that journal again. I opened it up to the first page, where the writer, someone named Thomas, described his time in the cabin. At first, it seemed like nothing more than a diary, the ramblings of a man passing time in isolation. But as I read on, it became disturbing. Thomas spoke of hearing things, too. Noises in the night, things in the woods. He wrote about a feeling of being followed, of shadows that moved when no one was there. I felt my stomach twist as I read more. It was too familiar. The same things I'd been hearing, the same restlessness I'd felt. The journal ended abruptly, the last entry written in a hurried, almost panicked hand. "They're here," it said. "They've always been here." I should have stopped reading. I know that now. But back then, I thought it was just the ramblings of a lonely man. I went downstairs, trying to shake off the unease. I told the others I'd found something odd in the journal, but no one seemed too interested. It wasn't until later that night, after a few more drinks, that things really started to spiral. That's when we heard the footsteps. I was just after midnight. Everyone was asleep, or at least pretending to be. I woke up to the sound of slow, heavy steps coming from the stairs. My heart raced as I sat up in bed. I didn't know what to think, but I couldn't bring myself to get up and check. The footsteps were deliberate, measured, like something was pacing back and forth just outside my door. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my phone, trying to call Sarah, but the signal was dead. The cabin was too remote, I guess. But that didn't stop the fear from rising in my chest. I waited, hoping the footsteps would stop. They didn't. After what felt like an eternity, I heard a soft knock at the door. I froze. It wasn't a loud knock, but just enough to send me over the edge. I couldn't stay there anymore. I had to see what was going on. I stood up, my legs shaking, and crept toward the door. I reached for the handle, and just before I opened it, the footsteps stopped. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to open the door and confront whatever was out there, but another part of me just wanted to run. I stayed still, holding my breath. Then the door handle started to jiggle. I pulled back from the door, heart pounding in my chest. It felt like the world had stopped moving. And then, out of nowhere, I heard a voice low, almost a whisper. "Let me in." The voice was familiar. Too familiar. I knew it wasn't Sarah or any of the others. It sounded like Thomas. The man from the journal. "Let me in." I backed away from the door, stumbling over my own feet. I had to get out of there. I didn't care if I looked crazy. I had to warn the others. I ran to Sarah's room and banged on the door. No answer. I ran to the others, waking them up. "Something's wrong. We need to leave," I told them, panicked. They all looked at me like I'd lost my mind. But as I turned to leave the room, I saw it. The shadow, standing at the edge of the hallway. It was tall, too tall, and it was shifting, like it wasn't entirely solid. For a split second, I thought I saw a face, empty eyes staring back at me, a mouth twisted into a grin. I screamed. I know I did. I'm sure I did. But none of the others seemed to hear it. They were just frozen. That's when the lights went out. The darkness that followed was absolute. And in that darkness, I heard something worse than any noise I could imagine. Breathing. Right behind me. I didn't wait. I didn't care if I was leaving everyone else behind. I bolted, running down the stairs, through the door, and into the woods. My only thought was to get away. Get far away. I didn't look back. Eventually, I found the road. I don't remember much after that, just the panic, the dread. I made it to the nearest town and called for help. The police found the cabin the next morning, but by the time they got there, it was empty. Not just empty, it was abandoned, like it had never been used. No sign of anyone, no sign of anything. I left the area as soon as I could. I don't even know if the others made it out. I haven't heard from them since. I still think about Thomas. What he wrote in that journal. How the things he described, the things he feared, started happening to us. Was it just coincidence? Maybe. But there's a part of me that wonders if that cabin was cursed. Or maybe it wasn't the cabin at all. Maybe it was something else. Something that followed us. I don't go to the woods anymore. Not after that. It's been 3 years. And I still hear those footsteps in my dreams. They're getting closer. Story number 12. I've never told anyone the full story because, honestly, I don't think anyone would believe me. Hell, I still can't fully believe it myself, but what happened at Stormy Ridge has been eating at me for years. I've never been the type to get spooked by ghost stories or anything, but what we saw, what we were a part of, it changed everything. I need to get this out, so maybe I can stop looking over my shoulder every damn time I hear the wind at night. It started when my friend Alex and I decided to do something different, hike the Appalachian Trail for a few days. We were in our 20s, fresh out of college, eager to get away from the noise of the city and enjoy some peace and quiet. Alex had read about this little cabin up in Stormy Ridge, a place so remote that you'd think nobody lived there anymore. It was perfect, just us, the mountains, and maybe a campfire or two. Nothing could go wrong, right? The first day was beautiful. The trail was grueling, but we made it to the cabin by sunset. It was rustic, like something straight out of a postcard. No electricity, no running water, just the cabin and the surrounding forest. It felt like we were a million miles from anywhere. We laughed and cracked open a couple beers, enjoying the simplicity of it all. The weirdness didn't start until the second night. That's when we heard it faint at first, like the wind, but then it was more like a chant, low and rhythmic. I didn't think much of it at first. The wind plays tricks on you up there. But Alex was more curious. He went out onto the porch, squinting into the trees. He said he thought he saw something in the distance, just past the tree line. Maybe a figure, he wasn't sure, but, of course, he was determined to go find out. I wasn't keen on the idea, but I couldn't let him wander off alone. We grabbed our flashlights and followed the sounds. The deeper we went, the louder it got. It was unsettling, this constant chanting, that seemed to carry on the wind, coming from somewhere deep in the woods. The trees were thick around us, and the shadows felt heavier than they should have been. Alex kept going ahead, practically leading the way, while I tried to keep pace but kept feeling like we were being watched. After a while, we reached a clearing, maybe an acre of open ground, covered in strange markings, rocks piled up in odd formations. It was eerily quiet now. The chanting had stopped. I was about to tell Alex we should head back when I saw them. At first, I thought I was imagining figures moving in the darkness, but then I saw more clearly. A group of people. They were dressed in long, tattered robes, their heads covered, and they were standing in a circle around a large stone. They were holding something above their heads, some kind of object wrapped in cloth. A sacrifice? It didn't make sense. We'd stumbled right into something we shouldn't have. And just as I realized it, Alex stepped forward, his foot crunching a twig on the ground. It was the worst sound in the world. One of them turned toward us, and my blood ran cold. They didn't seem surprised. It was like they knew we were there. Without a word, the rest of them slowly turned to face us. They didn't say a single thing, but the air between us thickened, almost suffocating, like we were caught in a net. It was as if the world had stopped, waiting. Before I could say anything, Alex tried to talk to them. "Hey, we didn't mean to intrude, we're just lost," he said, his voice shaky. The figure who had looked at us slowly moved toward us, and the others stayed in place, silent. It was like a dream, one of those where you can't move, can't scream. The person came closer, their face hidden by the hood, but I swear I saw their eyes. They were black. Not dark, like the shadows, but pure black, no white at all. I could barely breathe. Then, the person spoke in a low, gravelly voice. "You should not have come." My stomach twisted, and a cold sweat broke out across my skin. I felt a deep, primal fear settle in my chest. Alex was still trying to talk, trying to reason, but nothing he said made sense. The figure lifted their hand and, without warning, pointed directly at us. In an instant, something shifted. I could feel it in the air, something ancient and heavy, like a veil lifting. The others, still silent, began to chant again, but this time, it wasn't the same peaceful hum. It was sharp, harsh, almost like an incantation. I knew, right then, that we were in deep trouble. Suddenly, Alex collapsed, dropping to his knees. I rushed to him, but he wouldn't look at me. His eyes were wide, unblinking, staring into the blackness in front of him, like he wasn't even seeing me. He kept whispering something, but it was unintelligible, just noise. I shook him, desperate to snap him out of it. And then, the worst part, the voice came again, but it wasn't from the hooded figure. It came from behind us. "Leave now, or join them," the voice echoed, sending chills down my spine. I whipped around, but no one was there. The chanting grew louder, and I could feel the ground shifting beneath me. It was as if the land itself was alive, breathing beneath my feet. I don't know how we got out of there. I grabbed Alex's arm, pulling him to his feet, and ran. We didn't look back. I couldn't. My mind was racing, my heart pounding. I could hear their footsteps behind us, echoing in the woods, but when I turned, there was no one there, no sound except the crunching of leaves beneath our feet. When we finally made it back to the cabin, I locked every door and window. Alex was in a daze, sitting on the floor, muttering under his breath, not making any sense. He wouldn't even look at me. His eyes were still so dark, black as coal. I didn't know what had happened, but I knew it wasn't just fear. Something had happened to him out there. We didn't sleep that night. I sat there in the corner of the cabin, my mind spinning, my heart racing. I didn't know if we were still in danger, or if what we'd seen was just a bad dream, but it didn't feel like that. It felt real, too real. The next morning, Alex was different. He didn't remember anything from the night before, nothing. It was like it had been erased from his mind. But I remembered. I remembered everything, and it terrified me. As we packed up to leave, I glanced out the window. The trees were still, no wind, no movement. But I swear, I saw something in the distance. Figures, standing at the edge of the tree line, just watching us. I don't know what would have happened if we stayed. I don't know if we were marked, if there was something we had to do, or if we were meant to be part of their ritual. All I know is we left, and we never went back. And to this day, I don't know if it was some kind of ancient rite, or if we just stumbled upon something we weren't supposed to see. But whatever it was, it felt like we were chosen, whether we liked it or not. Alex and I don't talk about it much. We can't. It's like a wound we don't dare open. But when the nights are still, and the wind howls through the trees, I can't shake the feeling that something is still out there, watching, waiting. And sometimes, when I close my eyes, I swear I can hear that chant in the distance, always waiting. Story number 13. I had rented the cabin in Old Pine Ridge as a place to transition in peace, far from the noise and judgment I'd been suffocated by for years. It was just supposed to be a simple retreat, quiet, secluded, a place where I could breathe. I'd been yearning for some space where no one could question me, where I didn't have to hide parts of myself just to survive. The listing had sounded perfect, rustic, isolated, a little off the beaten path, but I was okay with that. I figured if I was ever going to live my life the way I needed to, it would start here. It wasn't long after I arrived that things began to feel wrong. The cabin was beautiful, in a way that old places can be. It had this eerie charm to it, like something out of a forgotten fairy tale. The first few days were uneventful. I spent my time cleaning, organizing, and simply enjoying the silence that the woods offered. The first night was peaceful, too, just the sound of the wind against the trees and the occasional crackling from the fireplace. But then, things started to happen. Small things at first, things I could easily brush off as coincidence. The flicker of the lights when no one was near the switches, the creak of the floorboards when I knew I was alone. I thought I was just being paranoid. The stress of everything, the transition, the isolation had probably gotten to my head. So, I kept going, telling myself to ignore it. Then, one morning, I woke up to find something strange. There were symbols drawn on the walls, not large or obvious, but enough to catch my eye when I stood in the kitchen. Little marks, almost like scratches, formed shapes I didn't recognize. They were intricate, like ancient runes or tribal symbols, and they made my skin crawl the more I stared at them. I didn't touch them, not at first. I thought maybe it was just the previous tenants, some eccentric artists who had stayed here before me. But the more I looked at them, the more something in my gut told me I wasn't just looking at some odd scribblings. I kept my distance, but every time I looked at the walls, it felt like the symbols were getting closer to me, almost as if they were shifting. It sounds ridiculous now, but I swear I could feel them. The first photograph appeared on the kitchen table the next day. I wasn't sure if I'd left it there or if it had somehow appeared overnight, but when I saw it, my heart skipped. It was a black and white photo of a family standing together in front of the cabin. Their faces looked so familiar, but I couldn't place them. Their eyes, there was something off about them. Not in a sinister way exactly, but in a way that felt like I should know them. Like I'd seen them in a dream or somewhere else before. I didn't recognize the faces, but something about them gnawed at me. The mother in the photo had the same smile my aunt used to have, one that could hold warmth, but also a subtle edge. The father, tall and imposing, reminded me of someone I couldn't quite put my finger on. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a memory I couldn't reach, and the longer I stared at the photo, the more the urge to understand it, to find out who they were, consumed me. But that wasn't the worst part. It was the way the photo was left there, almost like someone had placed it intentionally, like someone wanted me to see it. I didn't want to overthink it. Maybe it was just part of the cabin's history, a relic from another time. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Days passed, and I kept seeing more photographs. Sometimes they would appear on the kitchen table, other times on the couch or next to the bed. They all featured the same people, but the more I saw them, the more unsettling it became. There was something in their eyes, something that seemed to be staring directly into me. It was like they knew me, and they were waiting for me. Then came the night the wall cracked. I had been sitting in the living room, reading, when I heard a soft noise, a crackling sound, like dry wood splitting. At first, I thought it was the cabin settling, but when I turned my head toward the source of the noise, I saw a long crack spreading across the wall, directly beneath the symbols. It wasn't the house settling, it was something else. I tried to ignore it, tried to tell myself it was just natural wear and tear. But I knew deep down that it wasn't. It was as though something was pushing through from the other side. I could almost hear it, the whispering in the cracks, urging me to do something. I don't know what made me do it, but I walked toward the wall, my heart pounding. The closer I got, the louder the whispers became. They were faint at first, almost like an echo of a voice. But then they grew clearer. "Look for it," they said. "It's in you." I froze. The room went cold, and for the first time since arriving, I felt the weight of the cabin pressing in on me. The symbols on the walls seemed to shift, writhing as if alive, and the photos on the table there were more now. Dozens of them began to tremble. I backed away from the wall. I didn't know what to do, but I couldn't stay there. I needed answers. The urge to leave was strong, but there was something else. It was like the cabin was pulling me towards something deeper. The next day, I went into the attic. I hadn't wanted to explore it before. It felt wrong, like opening a door that shouldn't be opened. But I had to know. I had to see what was hidden up there. What I found left me breathless. There, tucked in a corner, was an old chest covered in dust. I almost didn't want to touch it, but my hands moved on their own, pulling the heavy lid open. Inside was a collection of old belongings, clothes, a few books, and, at the very top, a journal. The leather was cracked and worn, and it looked ancient. I hesitated before flipping it open, but when I did, I couldn't stop reading. The journal was written by someone who had lived in this cabin long before me. The name in the front made my stomach lurch. Maggie. I don't know why, but it hit me like a punch in the gut. I didn't know who Maggie was, but something deep inside me screamed that I needed to keep reading. The journal chronicled the life of a woman named Maggie, who had lived in the cabin with her family. It spoke of strange rituals, of offerings left in the woods, and of an unholy pact made with the land. But the more I read, the more I realized something chilling. Maggie had died in the cabin under mysterious circumstances. The journal's final entry, scribbled in a frantic hand, read, "It's me, isn't it? I've come back, but I don't know how to break the cycle. I don't know how to leave." I slammed the journal shut, my pulse racing. I wasn't sure what it meant, but the weight of it settled over me like a fog. I kept hearing Maggie's voice, whispering in my head, calling me by name. That's when it hit me. The photos, the symbols, the cracking walls, it wasn't just coincidence. I wasn't just staying in some random cabin. I had somehow become part of Maggie's story. The spirits in the photos, the ones whose faces had seemed so familiar, were connected to me. I was living in her place, her life, and now I understood why I felt like I belonged here. I had to break free. I had to leave before the cycle claimed me too. I don't know how much time passed after that. Days blurred together. The whispers grew louder, more desperate, but I knew what I had to do. I found the spot in the woods where Maggie had made her pact, where she had sealed her fate. And there, beneath the old oak tree, I buried the journal. I buried the past, and everything that came with it. As I left Old Pine Ridge that day, I felt the weight lift off my chest. I didn't know if I'd truly broken the curse, but I knew I had to walk away. I had to keep walking. Because sometimes, breaking the cycle means walking away from the past and never looking back. Story number 14. It started with the whispers. The soft, barely audible murmurs that slithered through the silence of the cabin at night. At first, I thought it was the wind. It had to be. The trees surrounding Briarwood Pines were thick with age, their branches scraping against the windows like long-fingered hands. But then, one night, it was different. The whispers weren't the wind. They were voices, and they weren't coming from outside. I didn't want to believe it at first. I was here to escape, to find peace after losing her. Hannah had been my partner for 5 years. She was everything to me. Her death hit me harder than I could ever explain. The car accident had been sudden, unexpected. One moment, we were planning our next adventure, and the next, she was gone. So, when I stumbled across this cabin in Briarwood Pines, tucked far away from anything that could remind me of the life I'd lost, it felt like fate. The isolation should have been comforting. It wasn't. The cabin wasn't much. Small, secluded, perched atop a steep hill that dipped into the dense forest. It was the kind of place you imagine people go when they want to disappear. To be left alone, it was perfect. The moment I stepped inside, I felt the weight of my grief lift, if only a little. The first night was quiet, peaceful even. I let myself believe that I might finally find some semblance of calm. But by the third night, things had changed. It was as if the cabin itself had grown alive, breathing and pulsing in the dark. The voices started faintly, barely noticeable at first, low, soft, like whispers in the next room. My first instinct was that they were nothing, just my mind playing tricks on me in the silence. Maybe it was the wind, or maybe the house settling, though I was starting to doubt that. The second night, they were louder, clearer, and they didn't stop. They came from all directions, like they were just out of reach, floating through the walls, around the furniture. Each night, the sounds grew more distinct, more urgent, as if trying to speak to me. I should have left. I should have packed up and gone back to my apartment, back to the city, where I knew there was no strange, suffocating presence waiting to swallow me whole. But I couldn't. My grief kept me rooted here, like I was supposed to be in this cabin, supposed to hear these voices. I needed to know what they were, why they were there. It felt like the last thread connecting me to her, to Hannah. Maybe, I thought, she was trying to reach me. Maybe this place was part of her, too. I didn't sleep the night I heard them for the first time. The voices were clearer now. They weren't just whispers anymore, they were words. Soft at first, like a conversation from another room, but I could make out a few of them. Please, help, don't, leave, can't, breathe. The last one sent a chill up my spine. I tried to convince myself that it was nothing, that it was just my mind playing tricks. But then, I heard it again, clearer this time. The words sounded familiar, but I couldn't place them. I lay there in the dark, frozen under the weight of those words. My eyes darted around the room, but nothing moved. I told myself it was nothing, a figment of my imagination. But deep down, I knew it was something more. The next morning, I decided I had to explore. I needed to find the source of the voices. I spent the next few hours combing the cabin. It was an old place, built long before my time, but it was well maintained. There wasn't much to it. A small living room, a bedroom, a kitchen, and a tiny bathroom. Nothing unusual. But then I found it. In the back of the bedroom, behind an old, dust-covered bookshelf, there was a door. It was hidden. I would have never noticed it if I hadn't been pacing back and forth in a restless fit, trying to calm my nerves. At first, I thought it was just a closet. But when I opened it, I was met with an odd, stale air. The smell of dust and something else, something sour. I hesitated, but then curiosity got the better of me. Inside, there was a small room, barely big enough for me to stand in without brushing against the walls. There was nothing there but old boxes and some decaying furniture, pieces of forgotten lives left behind. But there, tucked beneath an old wardrobe, was a leather-bound box. My heart pounded as I bent down and lifted it. It was surprisingly heavy. When I opened it, I found a stack of old photographs and papers. I flipped through them, not knowing what I expected to find. The first photograph stopped me cold. It was a picture of a woman, smiling faintly. Her face looked familiar, though I couldn't place her. But as I flipped through more photos, I began to feel a sickening sense of déjà vu. There she was again, in another photo, this time with a man standing beside her. A man I recognized. It was Hannah's father. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. The woman in the photographs wasn't someone I knew. It was a woman I had never seen before, but her presence here, in this cabin, with Hannah's father, this was too much of a coincidence. I pulled out a few more documents, papers that seemed to detail old family history. The name on the papers was Gillian Turner, Hannah's mother, but she had died when Hannah was very young, or so I had been told. I sat there, the box still in my lap, the papers scattered around me. There was more. There was always more. The letters were filled with references to old land deals, properties that had been sold or given away. But then I found something that stopped me in my tracks. It was a letter, dated from the early 1982, addressed to Gillian from someone named Robert Bob Thompson. The letter detailed the transfer of land, of the cabin itself. It also spoke of something darker, a family secret that had been kept hidden for decades. The last line of the letter made my blood run cold. If you leave, it will come for you, and it will take her too. That's when I understood. The voices, the strange presence in the cabin, the feeling that something was wrong. It wasn't just the land. It was the history. It was Hannah's family. The people who had once lived here had been involved in something dark, something I wasn't supposed to know, but I had uncovered it now. And the voices, the whispers, they were warning me. By the time night fell, I could feel it. The air had changed. The voices, which had seemed so distant and faint, were now clear. They were all around me, whispering in the dark. The words were clearer now, each one more insistent than before. Leave or die. I knew I had to go, but my body wouldn't move. I was paralyzed by the realization that the cabin wasn't just haunted, it was cursed, and it was trying to claim me. I grabbed the box of papers, but before I could leave, I heard a faint tapping at the door. It wasn't the wind, it was something else, something worse. I turned to face the door, and that's when I saw her, the woman from the photographs. She was standing there, in the doorway, her face pale and gaunt. Her eyes were the same as Hannah's. I screamed, but no sound came out. My breath caught in my throat as she stepped forward, her feet moving with a strange, unnatural grace. The door slammed shut behind me, and I was trapped. The whispers grew louder. I could barely hear myself think over the cacophony of voices. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. The room was silent. The woman was gone. I looked around, frantic, searching for any sign of what had just happened. But there was nothing. No evidence of her presence, no footprints, no signs of struggle. I was alone. For the first time since I had arrived, I was completely alone. I didn't stay another night. I packed what I could and ran out of that cabin without looking back. I didn't even stop to grab the photographs, the papers, anything. It didn't matter. The truth was in me now, and I couldn't change it. I left Briarwood Pines that night, and I haven't gone back. But sometimes, in the quiet of my apartment, I hear the whispers, and I know it wasn't just the cabin, it was Hannah's legacy. And whatever it was that followed me from that place, it's still with me, waiting for the right moment to strike. Story number 15. I'm still trying to understand why I didn't just leave that night when I had the chance. But I stayed, and I think I've been haunted ever since. Let me start from the beginning. It was a few years ago, back in 1984, when I decided I needed a break. My life was a mess. Work had me tied up in knots, my relationships were all over the place, and I just felt like I was suffocating in the city. So, I did what any reasonable person would do. I rented a cabin in the middle of nowhere, Cedar Creek, Tennessee. A place so quiet and remote, I thought it would be the perfect escape. When I got there, the cabin was everything I wanted. Small, isolated, surrounded by trees. The kind of place you read about in those old travel magazines, where you're supposed to reconnect with nature. It was perfect. It was the dead of winter, so I figured I'd just stay for the weekend, maybe get a little solitude, recharge. I didn't think much of it, really. I had a book, a few drinks, and the silence that seemed to stretch for miles. The first few hours were exactly what I hoped for. I made a fire, cracked open a beer, and settled in. The cabin was old, but not in a bad way. More like it had seen a lot of life, you know? It had character. The kind of place where you half expect to find a ghostly portrait of someone's grandmother hanging on the wall. I did find a few old photographs scattered around, and one of them caught my eye, a picture of a family. A mother, father, and 2 young kids, standing in front of the cabin. Nothing weird about it, just an old family photo. But there was a strange aura about it. The parents looked almost too happy. Like they knew something I didn't. I didn't think much of it, though. I figured I was just overthinking. The night came quickly, and the woods around me became pitch black. I was feeling pretty good, relaxed, content with my decision to take some time off. I had some dinner, watched the flames flicker in the desk fireplace, and eventually went to bed. That's when the first strange thing happened. I woke up in the middle of the night, hearing a faint noise. A soft crackling, almost like the sound of fire, but not quite. I tried to ignore it at first, thinking it was just the house settling, but it got louder, closer. I opened my eyes, and for a moment, everything was dark. Too dark. The moonlight outside wasn't reaching through the windows as it should have, and I felt something shift in the air, like the atmosphere had thickened, become heavier. I heard something faintly tapping against the window, like a twig hitting the glass. My heart was pounding as I swung my legs out of bed and grabbed my flashlight. I'm not the paranoid type, but that night, There was something off. I checked the window. Nothing. The wind had picked up outside, and I figured that was what caused the tapping sound. But something inside me told me it wasn't just the wind. I turned to go back to bed when I noticed something else. There, in the corner of the room, was an old lantern. I hadn't noticed it when I first arrived. It sat on a small wooden table near the fireplace, and it looked like it had been there for years, dusty, unused. Except, now, it was glowing. The soft glow of a flame flickering inside it. I felt my chest tighten. It wasn't like any lamp I'd ever seen. It wasn't plugged in. There was no oil, no obvious source for the flame. And yet, there it was. I couldn't explain it. I reached out, trembling, and grabbed it. It felt cold to the touch, yet the flame inside flickered with a strange intensity. I couldn't pull my eyes away from it. The light seemed almost alive, somehow. Then, the feeling of being watched hit me like a punch to the gut. I turned quickly, scanning the room, but there was nothing. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The next morning, I tried to put it all out of my mind. I told myself it was just an old lantern, the kind which you find in cabins like this. Maybe the gas inside had been ignited by a draft or something, but something gnawed at me all day. When I went into town to get supplies, I overheard a conversation at the local diner that made my blood run cold. One of the locals, a weathered old man with deep wrinkles etched into his face, was talking to the waitress. He said something about the lantern of Cedar Creek and how it had been there for years, ever since the Miller family disappeared. I couldn't help but listen in, and when I did, my stomach dropped. The Millers were the family from the picture I had found. According to the old man, they had vanished without a trace. No one knew what happened to them, but it was rumored that they'd been cursed by the land, and the lantern was said to be their only link to the afterlife. I asked the waitress about it, but she quickly changed the subject. It wasn't until I got back to the cabin that I realized what I had stumbled into. That lantern wasn't just some antique. It was the key to something dark and terrible. The next night, I decided I needed to know more. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something I wasn't seeing, something hidden just beneath the surface. I spent hours searching through the cabin, going through every drawer, every closet, every nook and cranny. That's when I found the journal. It was tucked away in a locked drawer in the old wooden desk in the corner of the living room. The pages were yellowed with age, and the handwriting was faint, but I could make out enough to know that it had been written by the father of the Miller family. It described their daily life, ordinary things at first, but then the entries started to get darker. There were mentions of strange noises at night, shadows in the trees, and a feeling of being watched. The last few pages were nothing but frantic scribbles about how the family had been marked by something ancient, something that lived in the land itself. Read about the day they had gone missing. The father described seeing a glowing light in the distance, something that drew them toward the woods. They followed it, believing it would lead them to something extraordinary, something that would change their lives forever, but they were wrong. The last entry was a warning. If you see the light, don't follow it, it will take you too. I could feel my breath quicken as I realized what had happened. The lantern, the light, it wasn't just some random phenomenon, it was a lure, a trap, and it was pulling me in. I sat there for hours, turning the journal over and over in my hands, trying to understand what to do. But the more I read, the more I realized that I couldn't escape it. The lantern had already found me, just like it had found the Millers. It was calling me. I don't know how long I sat there in the dark, but at some point, I heard the sounds again, the tapping on the window. It wasn't the wind, it was something else, something moving outside. I grabbed the lantern, which was glowing brighter than ever, and I headed toward the door. When I opened it, the cold night air hit me like a slap. I looked into the woods, my heart hammering in my chest, and I saw it, a figure, standing just beyond the tree line, its form barely visible in the moonlight. It was tall, thin, and it moved slowly toward me. I tried to move, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. The lantern's flame flickered as if it were alive, as if it was feeding off my fear. And then, just as suddenly as it appeared, the figure vanished into the trees. The light in the lantern died, leaving me standing in the dark, trembling. I didn't wait another minute. I grabbed my things, locked up the cabin, and drove back to town as fast as I could. I don't think I've ever driven so quickly in my life. Since that night, I've never been able to forget what happened. I know it sounds crazy, but I feel like that lantern is still out there, calling to me. Sometimes, I still hear the tapping on my windows at night. Other times, I see flashes of light out of the corner of my eye, just before I fall asleep. I'm not sure what happened to the Millers, or why that lantern was there, but I know one thing for sure. Whatever it wasn't just some local legend. It was real. And it's still out there, waiting. Story number 16. It was supposed to be a break, a chance to get away from the noise, from the constant buzz of our lives. James and I had been talking for months about how we needed a weekend to just breathe, to reconnect. Life was hectic: work, bills, obligations, and we hadn't really had a moment to just be in a long time. So, when we found this little cabin tucked away in Ashenwood Hollow, it felt like the perfect escape. I remember when we pulled up to the cabin, it looked charming in that rustic, quiet way. A small wooden structure surrounded by trees, far enough from civilization to feel isolated but close enough that we wouldn't have to rough it too much. I remember thinking it was exactly what we needed. That first night, though, things started feeling off. It wasn't obvious at first, just little things. The way the floorboards creaked when there was no one moving, the way the air in the room shifted every time you'd step into the hall. I tried to brush it off as old house quirks. That's what we told ourselves, anyway. The cabin had been built decades ago, so it wasn't surprising that the wood might settle or make odd sounds. But by the second night, it wasn't just creaking, it was whispers. Low, indistinct murmurs coming from somewhere deep inside the cabin. I convinced myself it was the wind, maybe an animal outside. But when I looked out the window, all I saw were the same trees, still and silent. James didn't hear it at first, but I noticed his unease when he started to stay up later than usual, sitting in the living room and staring at the fire. He wasn't one to be easily spooked, but even he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. "Do you think the cabin's haunted?" I asked him one evening, half joking but half serious. He laughed it off, as I knew he would, but his laugh didn't sound as carefree as it normally did. "You're overthinking it, babe," he said. "It's an old place. Old places make weird sounds." I wanted to believe him. I really did. But as the days passed, the atmosphere around us seemed to change. It wasn't just the noises anymore, it was the air, too. It felt thick, almost like something was waiting in the dark corners, watching us. I started sleeping with the light on, which I'd never done before. Still, no matter how much I tried to relax, my mind kept racing. Why were there no other cabins nearby? Why did it feel like we were the only ones who had ever stepped foot in this part of the woods? On the third night, after we'd had a quiet dinner and James had gone off to bed early, I decided to go for a walk. I thought some fresh air might help clear my head, even though I had a strange feeling that I shouldn't be alone outside at night. The moon was barely visible, but the trees blocked most of the light anyway. I kept walking, just far enough to get away from the cabin. I wasn't sure what I was hoping to find, maybe some sign of life, or maybe just the quiet reassurance that the world was normal. But I found something else. Near the edge of the forest, I came across a weathered stone. I bent down to touch it, and it felt like it had been there for centuries. There was something about the shape of it, almost like a marker, something that didn't belong in the middle of nowhere. I stood there for a moment, staring at it. Then I felt it. The prickling sensation at the back of my neck, like someone was watching me. I turned quickly, but there was no one there. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling. My heart started pounding. I turned back toward the cabin, my steps quickening, but the air felt heavier now, pressing against me. When I got back to the cabin, James was already asleep, but I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the whispers again, now clearer than ever. I was just about to get up and check the windows when something in the corner of the room caught my eye. A shadow. Just for a second. It was faint, but I saw it. I didn't want to wake James. I didn't want him to think I was overreacting, but my pulse was racing, and I couldn't keep still. The next morning, after we'd eaten breakfast, I convinced James to come with me to explore the cabin a little more. We had been using only the front room and the kitchen, but the rest of the house was much bigger. Maybe it was the extra space, or maybe it was because I didn't want to be alone, but I needed to know what else was in there. James didn't want to, but I kept pushing. "Come on, let's just see what's upstairs," I said, even though I already knew there was an unsettling silence upstairs. Reluctantly, he agreed, and we went up the creaky staircase. The second floor was darker, colder. There were old paintings on the walls, their frames cracked, faces in them blurred by time. The air smelled musty, like old paper and dust. As I walked into one of the rooms, something on the floor caught my eye, a loose board. I knelt down, pulling at the edges of it, and with a bit of effort, I lifted it. Beneath it was a small, dark hole in the floor, just large enough to fit a hand inside. "Look at this," I said to James, a strange excitement and fear both mixing in my chest. He stepped over to me, peering into the hole. "What is it?" he asked, voice low, like he could sense something wasn't right either. I reached into the hole, and my fingers brushed against something cold. Pulling it out, I found an old, leather-bound journal. It was tattered, its edges frayed, but it was surprisingly well preserved for something that must have been hidden for years. I glanced up at James, his face reflecting the same unease I was feeling. "What do you think this is?" I asked, though I already had a sinking feeling I knew what it might be. "Probably just some old stuff from the last owners," he said, though his words didn't seem convincing, even to him. We sat down in the corner of the room, and I opened the journal. The pages were yellowed, but the writing inside was legible. At first, it seemed like normal entries, little snippets of daily life from decades ago. But as I flipped through, the entries became darker, more cryptic. One of them was written in large, frantic letters. "They are coming for us. We can't leave. They know we're here. The forest won't let us go." My stomach dropped. I read on, unable to stop myself. The entries spoke of a family that had lived in the cabin in the 1950 seconds, a family that had suddenly vanished. There was no sign of them after a certain point, and the last entry was chilling. "They are dead, and they will not rest. The hollow will keep us forever." I turned to James. He was staring at the journal, his face pale. This is messed up," he muttered. Suddenly, I felt that same feeling of being watched. My heart started to race again. It was like someone, or something, was in the house with us, lurking just out of sight. I looked around the room, feeling the weight of the silence pressing down on me. "We need to leave," I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. James nodded, not needing any more convincing. We didn't even pack up our stuff. We left the journal behind, but it didn't matter. The feeling of being followed, of being watched, didn't go away. We didn't stay another night in the cabin. The whole ride back home, I couldn't shake the images from that journal out of my head. The people who had lived there, the family who vanished, and the unsettling truth that we were never really alone in that place. I don't know what happened to the family. I don't know if the hollow really keeps people forever, but every time I think back to that weekend, I'm reminded of the suffocating feeling of being watched. And I'll never forget the look in James's eyes when I said we needed to leave. I don't think he'd ever seen me so scared before. We never went back, and I'm not sure I ever will. Story number 17. It started when I arrived at the cabin. I had planned this trip for months. The idea was simple: spend a few weeks in the Blue Ridge Pines, getting lost in the solitude of nature, capturing the beauty of the Appalachian Mountains for my photography book. I needed this time to breathe, away from the chaos of city life and the constant pressure of deadlines. I was ready for some peace and quiet, just me, my camera, and the wilderness. I set up camp inside the small, rustic cabin tucked deep into the woods, the kind of place you only find when you go off the beaten path, far from civilization. The first few days were exactly what I needed. I woke early, hiked to my favorite spots, and returned in the evenings to review the photos, letting the serenity of the place settle over me. There was something about the stillness here that was unlike anything I had ever experienced. But then, on the fourth night, things started to change. It wasn't dramatic at first. I was sitting on the porch, reviewing my shots from the day. The light was fading fast, the golden hues of dusk melting into the cold blues of twilight. That's when I saw it, a shadow darting just beyond the tree line. It was quick, almost imperceptible. I thought I was just imagining it, but the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Something about the movement didn't feel natural. I shook it off. I'd spent enough time in the woods to know that animals can do strange things. A deer, maybe, or a fox. I wasn't the type to spook easily, but the next night, the shadow came back. This time, it was closer than I would have liked. It moved across the trees, shifting between the trunks like a living thing, its form indistinct but undeniably there. I froze, trying to make sense of it. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't a bird. It was something else. I grabbed my camera and snapped a photo, more out of instinct than reason. The flash illuminated the woods in front of me, but whatever it was gone before I could even focus the lens. I cursed under my breath. There was no way I could have missed it, but the photo showed nothing, just trees and the fading light of dusk. That's when the unease settled in. The shadow had moved with purpose, almost like it knew exactly where to be, exactly when to appear. But why? Why here? Why now? I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was tired, maybe a little too focused on my work. After all, who wouldn't be a little jumpy when you're alone in a cabin, miles from anyone? But the next day, I saw the shadow again. This time, it was right behind me. I was out on a trail I had walked dozens of times, my camera in hand, capturing shots of the trees and the light filtering through the canopy. I stopped to adjust my lens when I caught a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye. I turned quickly, but no one was there. I could have sworn I saw a figure tall, gaunt, with no clear features, just an outline of shadow. I felt a cold knot in my stomach. I hadn't imagined that. It wasn't the wind or the trees. It was something or someone moving just outside my peripheral vision. I didn't know what to think. I didn't want to believe in ghosts or anything like that, but the fear creeping up my spine was real. Too real. And for the first time since I'd gotten here, I began to feel like I wasn't alone, like the woods were watching me. That night, I stayed inside the cabin. I locked the door and pulled the curtains shut, though I wasn't sure why. I tried to distract myself with photos, reviewing the shots from the day, but my mind kept drifting back to the shadows. It was around midnight when I heard it, a faint scraping sound, like nails dragging across wood. It started low, almost imperceptible, but it grew louder, more distinct. I froze in my seat, the hairs on the back of my neck rising. I went to the window and peered out into the darkness. Nothing. But I could feel it. Something was out there. I grabbed the flashlight and stepped outside, my pulse racing in my ears. The woods were silent now, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. I swept the beam of light across the trees, trying to find anything that would explain the noise, but there was nothing. Nothing but the endless forest stretching in all directions. And then, I saw it again. The shadow, moving in between the trees. But this time, it was different. It wasn't just a shadow, it had form. I could see the shape of a person, tall and thin, their outline distorted, like they were part of the night itself. I felt a chill in my bones as the shadow stopped, as though it had seen me too. The figure was watching me. My heart pounded. I didn't know what to do. I should have run back into the cabin, locked the door, and never left again. But instead, I stood frozen, my mind racing. Who was this? What did they want? Suddenly, a voice whispered, soft at first, then louder, like it was coming from inside my head. "Help us." I stumbled backward, the flashlight falling from my hand and into the dirt. I turned and ran back to the cabin, slamming the door shut behind me, my breath coming in ragged gasps. My mind was spinning. Who was us? Who was out there? I didn't sleep that night. I spent the hours sitting in the corner of the cabin, clutching my camera like it might somehow protect me. But I couldn't escape the feeling of eyes on me, of something waiting just beyond the walls. The next morning, I tried to act normal. I grabbed my camera and went back out into the woods, determined to finish what I had started. I had work to do, but the shadow was there again, this time standing at the edge of the tree line, watching me. I snapped a photo, but the figure was gone by the time I looked at the camera's screen. But there was something else on the photo, a figure in the background, barely visible but undeniably human. I zoomed in, heart hammering. The image was clear enough for me to see a face. A woman's face, pale and hollow-eyed, staring directly into the lens. I couldn't breathe. I dropped the camera and backed away, shaking. This wasn't some trick of the light or my imagination. This was real. Whoever or whatever this was, it was trying to tell me something. I spent the next several days obsessing over the shadows. Each time I went out, they were there, always watching, always just out of reach. The more I tried to ignore them, the stronger the feeling became, like they were following me, waiting for me to uncover their story. But what story? And why me? It wasn't until the 6th day that I finally found the answer. I was deep in the woods, a place I had never explored before, when I stumbled across something hidden beneath the brush. It was an old stone marker, weathered by time. As I brushed away the dirt, I saw the faint inscription, "Rest in peace, 1912. And then it hit me. I began to piece things together. Over the years, there had been rumors of people vanishing in these woods, locals who were never found, whose disappearances were dismissed as accidents or natural causes. But as I looked at that marker, I realized these were no accidents. These were murders. And the people I was seeing, those shadows, were the victims, their souls unable to rest until their deaths were avenged. The realization crashed over me like a wave. I wasn't just being haunted by shadows. I was being haunted by the restless spirits of people who had been killed in these very woods. They were reaching out, trying to make me see, trying to make me understand what had happened to them. I left the cabin the very next day, packed up my things, and never looked back. The shadows never followed me after that, but I can still see them sometimes, in the corners of my mind, lurking just beyond my vision. I don't know who killed them, or why. But I know one thing for sure. Their story isn't over. And maybe, one day, they'll find someone who can finish what they started. Story number 18. I never expected to end up telling you this story. You know, I'm not one for sensationalizing things, but I don't think I've ever been so sure of what I experienced in my life. I've told a few people here and there, but nobody really listens. They say it's just my imagination, that I was too isolated, but I can't ignore what I saw. I can't pretend it didn't happen. It was 1987. I'd just gotten out of a pretty tough relationship, the kind that leaves you exhausted, unsure of who you are, and searching for anything to clear your head. I rented a cabin in Hidden Grove, a place way out in the mountains of West Virginia. I didn't care where it was. All I needed was peace, somewhere I could be alone. The owners of the cabin promised me a rustic escape, and that's exactly what I got. The cabin was a little more rundown than I expected, but it was perfect in a way. No distractions, no neighbors. Just me and the woods. I didn't think I'd regret it. The first night, everything seemed fine. I settled in, put my things away, lit a fire, and spent the evening reading. It was quiet. So quiet. There was no sound of cars or people, just the crackling of the fire and the occasional hoot of an owl. I felt this weird calm settle over me, the kind that only comes when you're truly alone, far from everything. But then, as I was about to fall asleep, I heard it, a woman crying. Soft at first, almost like it was part of the wind. But it wasn't. The sound was too human, too deliberate. The crying seemed to echo through the trees, rising and falling in waves, like someone mourning something lost. It wasn't close, but it wasn't distant either. I froze. My heart was pounding in my chest. I tried to convince myself it was an animal, or maybe a neighbor nearby. The nearest house was miles away, but maybe someone had a dog that sounded like a person. I tried to dismiss it, but it didn't stop. It lasted for hours. The sound of crying, like a soul torn apart by grief. I don't know why, but I couldn't move. I felt rooted to the spot, just listening to that wailing. I pulled the covers over my head and told myself I was imagining things. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I thought it might stop, it would start again. By morning, the crying was gone, and I tried to act like nothing had happened. I went about my day, hiking in the woods, making tea, reading my book, but the crying was still there, echoing in the back of my mind. I thought maybe it had been an animal, or perhaps a trick of the wind. But as the sun set that second night, I heard it again, louder this time, closer. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever it was trying to tell me something. I had to know what it was. So, around midnight, I grabbed a flashlight and headed into the woods, following the sound. The trees were thick, the air damp and cool. The flashlight beam danced over the underbrush, and every snap of a twig underfoot felt too loud, too obvious. I didn't know why I was going, why I felt this overwhelming need to know what was happening, but something in me couldn't stop. I needed to understand. I walked for what felt like hours, the crying growing louder the deeper I went. It wasn't a distant sound anymore. It was right there. I could feel it, could almost touch it. My pulse was racing, my hands trembling, but I pressed on. I knew something was out there, something I had to see, something I had to understand. Eventually I reached a clearing, and that's when I saw it. The remnants of what looked like an old family home. It wasn't much anymore, just a few half-burned beams and a collapsed roof, but the sight of it made my stomach churn. The place had been abandoned for years, but there was something about it, something in the air that felt wrong. A shiver ran down my spine. And that's when I saw the bodies. They were scattered around the clearing, lying among the remnants of the home like forgotten relics. Old clothing, worn shoes, twisted limbs. They weren't alive. I could tell that instantly. These were the remains of people who had been left to rot in the woods, forgotten and ignored by the world. I felt my knees go weak as I stumbled forward, the beam of my flashlight falling on an old, weathered trunk nearby. I dared to look closer, my heart pounding as I reached down and pulled the lid open. Inside, there was a small stack of papers and a diary. I opened the diary first. The pages were yellowed with age, but the ink was still legible. I began reading, my hands shaking as the words slowly became clear. The 15th of April, 1930. They are coming tonight. I can hear them in the woods. I have to protect my children. The rest of the pages were filled with frantic scribbles, desperate warnings, and prayers. I could feel my breath catch in my throat as I read. The entries were dated, starting months before, each one more frantic than the last. Whoever had written these words had known something was coming, something terrible. And then, as I flipped to the last entry, I froze. The 3rd of June, 1930. It's too late. They are dead. We are all dead. They killed my family. The final entry was a single, terrifying sentence. The woman will cry forever. She will never rest. That was when it hit me. The crying, the wailing, it wasn't random. It wasn't just some animal in the woods. It was the spirit of a woman, trapped in grief and rage. She had lost her family, and now she was calling out to anyone who might listen. She was trapped in that place, just like the others who had died there. The massacre, the bloodshed, it all came rushing back. I couldn't leave. I couldn't just walk away from this. I had to know what happened. I looked around, and that's when I saw the mass grave, the place where the family had been buried, unceremoniously, without a proper funeral. Their bodies had been left to rot, forgotten by the world. And the woman, she couldn't rest because her family had been taken from her, and their murderers had never been brought to justice. I ran back to the cabin, panic gripping me as the crying grew louder in my ears. I wasn't sure if I could escape whatever had followed me back, but I had to try. I slammed the door shut and locked it, not knowing what to expect. All I could think about was the diary, those last words. The woman's spirit was still here, still searching for something. Maybe she wanted justice. Maybe she just wanted someone to hear her. The next few days were a blur. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. The crying was constant, every night, louder and more intense. It was as if the woman was closing in on me, inching closer to my doorstep. The fear was overwhelming. I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. I wanted to leave, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. The pull of the place, the unfinished business, it was like a force I couldn't resist. On the fifth night, I couldn't take it anymore. I packed my things, grabbed the diary, and left the cabin. As I walked down the path that led back to the main road, I looked back, and for a brief moment, I swear I saw her. The woman. Standing in the clearing, her silhouette barely visible in the moonlight. Her arms were outstretched, as if she was reaching for something or someone. I never went back to Hidden Grove. I don't know if the woman ever found peace, or if she's still out there, crying in the woods, waiting for someone to help her. I'll never forget that feeling of being watched, of being drawn into something far beyond my understanding. But one thing I know for sure, whatever happened to that family, whatever curse was placed on them, it wasn't finished. It's still there, in the woods, and I'll never be able to forget it. Story number 19. I never believed in the supernatural, at least, not until I went to Catawba Falls. Looking back now, I wish I'd just stayed home, stuck to my usual routine, but I got this idea in my head that I needed to get away. It's a long story, but it boils down to one simple thing. I needed a break. Life had been heavy, and the pressure was getting to me. So, I rented this little cabin in the middle of nowhere, Catawba Falls, North Carolina. I'd heard rumors, of course, but who hasn't heard ghost stories in their life? Disappearances. Strange sightings. But I was there to escape, not to get sucked into something I didn't understand. The first day I arrived, everything was fine. The cabin was old, but cozy. No electricity, just oil lamps and a wood stove for warmth. I could already feel the isolation sinking in the kind of silence that presses on your chest. It felt peaceful, almost like a retreat, a break from the chaos of my life. That night, I sat by the fire and thought about what I'd left behind. I knew I wouldn't miss the noise of the city, but I didn't expect to feel this alone. Even with the woods surrounding me, everything felt strangely quiet. I didn't think much about the rumors. I wasn't the type to get spooked easily. I'd heard that people had gone missing over the years. Nothing solid, just whispers. No one knew for sure what happened to them, but I figured it was just the wildness of the Appalachian mountains, playing tricks on people's minds. And besides, I wasn't planning on sticking around long enough to be one of those stories. It was the second night that everything changed. I woke up in the middle of the night, heart pounding for no reason. I couldn't explain it, but there was a feeling in the air, like something was off. At first I tried to shake it off as just nerves, the kind of thing that comes from being alone in a remote cabin. But as I lay there, listening to the absolute silence, I noticed something wasn't right. The woods weren't silent anymore. I don't know how to describe it, but there was this faint noise like someone was walking around outside, just beyond the windows. The sound of soft footsteps crunching through the fallen leaves, just on the edge of my hearing. I waited, holding my breath, but it stopped. Maybe it was an animal. Maybe a deer or some other wildlife. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was out there. I didn't move, didn't even breathe for what felt like hours. Then the footsteps started again. This time, closer. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. My mind raced, but my body was frozen. I kept telling myself it was nothing, but then came a knock. It wasn't a knock like a normal person would make. It was light but sharp, like the tap of a finger on glass. 3 distinct taps on the cabin door. I wanted to ignore it. I thought maybe it was the wind, or maybe someone was out there playing a prank. But when you're in a place like this, in the dead of night, every instinct screams that something's wrong. I crept over to the door and peered through the small window. Nothing. No one. Just the trees, swaying gently in the night breeze. I opened the door, heart racing, but the night was still, unnervingly so. Nothing. No footprints. No signs of life at all. I stood there for a moment, wondering if I'd imagined it, and then closed the door. I locked it again, but the chill in the air didn't go away. The next morning, I tried to ignore what happened, chalking it up to nerves. It had been a long drive, and I was tired. Still, as the day wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time I stepped outside, I would glance over my shoulder, half expecting someone to be standing just out of sight in the trees. I told myself it was just paranoia, but I couldn't shake it. By the 3rd day, I couldn't ignore it any longer. I started to notice things, small things. Things that didn't make sense. Notes. At first, I thought I was losing my mind, but when I found the first one, it became impossible to ignore. It was in the kitchen, tucked under a bowl on the table. It wasn't much, just a few words, scribbled hastily. "I know who you are." I laughed at first. I thought it was some sick joke. But then I started thinking, who could have left it there? The cabin was supposed to be isolated. The nearest neighbor was miles away. I hadn't seen anyone in days. But the note was real. I couldn't deny that. I checked the cabin again, looking for anything that could explain it. But there was nothing. Just the same old place. The same heavy silence. Yet, the unease in my stomach wouldn't go away. I locked all the doors and windows before going to bed, telling myself it was just my imagination running wild. Still, I barely slept that night. The next morning, I found another note. This one was even worse. It was hidden in my backpack, underneath my clothes. It read, "You can't run from me. I know everything about you." I felt a cold sweat break out on my skin as I read it. How could someone know anything about me? Who was doing this? I didn't know what to do. I thought about leaving, but I didn't want to panic. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe someone was just messing with me. I tried to dismiss it, but my gut told me something wasn't right. The notes didn't stop. Every day, I would find one hidden somewhere in the cabin. They were always the same, always cryptic, always getting more personal. "I know where you're from," the next one read. Then, "I know who your friends are." It was as if someone was watching me, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal themselves. On the 4th night, I woke up to something else. A whisper. Soft, like a breath against my ear, but clear enough that I could make out the words. "You're mine now." I bolted upright, heart racing, but the room was empty. My breath was shallow, my hands trembling as I searched the cabin with my eyes. Nothing. But that feeling of being watched was stronger than ever. It wasn't just in my mind. Something was out there. I could feel it, like an invisible presence that was closing in, inch by inch. I stayed awake that night, refusing to close my eyes. I thought about leaving. I almost did. But as the night dragged on, I heard the footsteps again. They were louder now, closer. Whoever was out there knew I was awake. They were taunting me, playing with me. Then, the most terrifying thing happened. I found a note in the morning, hidden in my shoes. It was the same as the others, but this one had a final line. "I'm right behind you." That's when I realized the truth. Whoever this was, they weren't some random stranger. They weren't even a prankster. This person knew me. They knew my past, my every move. And worse, this person was connected to something I'd hoped to forget. Someone I had wronged. Someone who had disappeared years ago, and I'd never thought about again. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. The stalker wasn't just some creepy guy playing mind games. It was someone from my past, someone who I had forgotten, but who had never forgotten me. I couldn't escape it. And worse, they were right there with me, closing in, their presence growing stronger every day. I couldn't stay there anymore. I packed up my things, but I knew it was too late. As I left the cabin, I swear I heard the soft whisper again, faint but clear. "You're mine now." And when I turned back for one last glance, the figure standing in the doorway wasn't just some figment of my imagination. It was real, and I was never going to be free of it. Story number 20. I can't shake the feeling that something is wrong. Maybe it's just because I haven't been able to sleep properly since we moved into that place, but I can't keep pretending it was all in my head. It wasn't. And if you were there, you'd understand why I can't stop thinking about what happened in Misty Hollow. We moved in with high hopes. It was supposed to be a fresh start for our family. After all, we'd been through a lot in the past few years, and a quiet life in the country was supposed to heal all the scars that city living had left on us. The cabin was tucked deep in the woods, with nothing but trees and silence surrounding us. When we first arrived, it was idyllic, peaceful, remote, like something out of a postcard. But, now that I look back, I should have noticed that silence from the start. It was unnatural. No birds, no rustling leaves, not even the soft hum of insects, just stillness. That night, we stayed in the cabin, and even then, something felt off. The air was thick with tension, like the woods were holding their breath. We ate dinner quietly, and afterward, I tried to ignore the feeling gnawing at the pit of my stomach. My wife, Leah, and I put the kids to bed, and as usual, we stayed up late talking. I remember asking her what she thought of the place. She said it was beautiful, but there was something in her voice, a hesitation. She didn't fully believe it was as perfect as it seemed. But she shrugged it off, just like I did. That first night was when it started. I'm not sure when it began, but at some point, I was woken up by the sound of something moving outside. Soft, slow, like the brush of a hand against the cabin's wooden walls. I lay there, listening, heart pounding in my chest. Leah was asleep beside me, and the kids were silent in the other room. It wasn't an animal, at least not anything I knew. It was too deliberate, too purposeful. I rolled over and looked out the window, but all I could see was the darkness of the woods. The air felt cold, even with the heater on. The next morning, I told Leah about the noise. She brushed it off, said it was probably just the wind or some critter. But I couldn't shake it. Something about that sound didn't sit right. It wasn't until the following night that I really started to worry. We'd finished dinner and were cleaning up when I noticed the silence again. No wind, no animals, just this heavy, suffocating quiet. I stepped outside for a breath of fresh air, hoping to clear my head, and that's when I saw it. There, standing just beyond the tree line, was something I can't quite explain. It wasn't an animal, but it wasn't human either. It was tall, hunched over, and its eyes glowed faintly in the dark. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen in place. I wanted to shout, to run, but I couldn't move. It just stood there, watching me. Then, after what felt like an eternity, it disappeared back into the woods. I don't even know if I blinked the entire time. I rushed back inside, heart racing, and I could see the concern on Leah's face when she asked what was wrong. I tried to tell her what I'd seen, but the words wouldn't come out right. She just shook her head, told me I was tired and that I should get some rest. I didn't sleep that night. The whole time I kept hearing that sound again, the same scraping against the walls, like something was trying to get in. The days that followed were strange. We tried to settle in, but the forest seemed to close in on us more each day. The kids were starting to get scared too. Max, our youngest, wouldn't go outside without holding on to me. And Lily? She kept saying there was something in the woods that was watching her. She would wake up crying in the middle of the night, her eyes wide with fear. I tried to reassure her, but I was starting to lose confidence in my own words. Leah was concerned, but didn't want to make things worse, so she kept it to herself. One afternoon, I decided to go out and explore the woods to try and get a better sense of what was happening. I thought maybe I could find something, a clue, anything that would explain the strange things we'd been experiencing. I didn't tell Leah, not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't think it would do any good. I was beginning to feel like she didn't believe me. I walked for hours, deeper into the woods than I'd ever gone before. The silence was unbearable, and the further I went, the more oppressive it felt. It was like the trees themselves were closing in on me. I kept telling myself it was just my nerves, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. That's when I found it. Hidden beneath a blanket of moss was a stone marker, old and weathered, but still legible. The words carved into it read, "To the guardians of the hollow, a pact made, a pact broken." The air grew colder, and I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I had to get back to the cabin. The woods were alive, watching me, waiting. I turned and hurried back, and when I arrived, Leah was pacing outside, looking frantic. She said she hadn't been able to find me for hours, and the kids were crying inside. I didn't tell her about the stone. Not yet. I couldn't. Something told me it was better if she didn't know. That night, everything changed. The creatures came out of the woods. At first, it was just one or two shadows darting between the trees, but as the night wore on, it became clear that there were more of them. They were moving closer, and they weren't hiding anymore. Their eyes glowed, like the thing I'd seen before, and their bodies were grotesque and misshapen, almost human but not quite. They didn't make a sound. The air was thick with dread, and I could feel the tension in my chest, like it was suffocating me. I tried to lock the doors, but it didn't matter. They were already there, pressing their faces to the windows, scraping their claws along the walls. I grabbed Leah and the kids and ran upstairs, thinking maybe the second floor would be safer. We huddled together, the sound of scratching growing louder, more frantic. It felt like the entire forest was closing in on us. I could hear their whispers now, low and guttural, filling the cabin with a sense of terror I couldn't escape. I knew then that we had done something to break the peace of the land. The pact, the one that was carved into that stone. The creatures weren't just animals, they were the guardians, the ones who protected this place from intruders. And we had intruded. We had broken something that had been there long before us. In a panic, I ran back downstairs, hoping to find some way to stop them, to make things right. That's when I found it. A hidden drawer in the kitchen, and inside, an old book. It was filled with pages of strange symbols and rituals, all written in a language I didn't recognize. But there was one passage that stood out. It described the pact that had been made, how the guardians would protect the land from harm, but only as long as the forest remained undisturbed. There was a ritual to undo the damage, to restore the balance, but it required something in return, a life. I knew what I had to do, but I couldn't bring myself to tell Leah. Instead, I grabbed the book and ran into the woods, leaving her with the kids. The creatures followed me, and I could feel their presence closing in. I reached the stone marker, and as I recited the words from the book, the earth trembled beneath me. The creatures howled, a sound that made my skin crawl, but it was too late. The pact had been broken, and I had paid the price. When I returned to the cabin, Leah was waiting for me, still scared but relieved to see me safe. The creatures were gone, but I knew that they would always be there, lurking in the woods, waiting. We left Misty Hollow the next day, and we never went back. I know if what I did was right, but I don't think I'll ever be able to forget the look in those creatures' eyes. They weren't evil, not in the way we think of evil. They were ancient, bound by a contract older than anything we could understand, and when we broke that contract, we set something loose, something that wasn't going to forget us. Story number 21. I never believed in the supernatural, at least, not until that weekend. It was supposed to be the perfect trip, just 4 friends, a remote cabin, and a rare blood moon. We'd been planning it for months, the kind of getaway where the worries of the world would disappear. But what we didn't know was that this wasn't just another cabin in the woods. It was something much darker, and the blood moon wasn't just a spectacle in the sky, it was a harbinger. It started off like any other weekend escape. We were all in our 20s, looking for some fun. Drew, my best friend since high school, had found the cabin. It was isolated, tucked deep into Wolf Creek, Tennessee, where no one would bother us. The perfect place for a quiet weekend of drinking, campfire stories, and maybe a little hiking. Drew and I, along with Mia and Ryan, all piled into the SUV and headed out late Friday afternoon, eager for the break from our busy lives. By the time we reached the cabin, night had fallen. The house itself was a quaint, 2-story wooden structure, perched on a hillside surrounded by dense woods. We were all excited, but something felt off. Nothing major, just an unease that I couldn't shake. Mia kept saying it was because of the full moon rising, casting an odd red tint across the sky. Ryan, always the skeptic, made a joke about how we were just staying in some weird, creepy place and that it was totally normal. Drew was grinning, already unloading his bag, while I just felt this itch at the back of my neck that wouldn't go away. We made ourselves comfortable inside, but the whole place felt too quiet, too still. There was an old stone fireplace with a large mantel, dust and cobwebs gathering in the corners. I thought it was just the usual wear and tear of an old cabin. Drew fired up the fireplace, and we sat down with our beers, cracking jokes, and starting up a playlist for the night. It wasn't long before the first strange thing happened. Mia, who was sitting by the window, froze mid-laugh. "Guys, listen," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. The rest of us turned, looking at her. She pointed out the window, and we all heard it, a soft growl, like a low hum that seemed to vibrate the air itself. At first, we dismissed it as some wild animal. Drew, of course, was the first to speak. "Probably a coyote or something," he said, with that grin of his, as though everything was fine. But it didn't sit right with me. There was something wrong about the sound. It wasn't just an animal, it was intentional, almost like it was coming from something much larger. The growl was followed by what sounded like heavy footsteps, breaking the dry leaves underfoot. I told myself it was nothing, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. We decided to head out to the porch to look at the blood moon. It was as red as they'd said it would be, casting a strange glow over the trees. It felt surreal. Ryan made another joke about werewolves, but Mia wasn't laughing. Her eyes were wide, darting to the woods beyond the porch, her lips trembling. "You hear that again?" she asked, her voice small. "I don't hear anything," I said, brushing it off, but I knew she was right. The growl was there again, distant but unmistakable. It was like it had followed us, just waiting in the trees. We all went back inside. Drew and Ryan were too drunk to care, laughing and arguing over a card game. Mia was pacing, her eyes constantly flicking to the windows, and I could feel my own tension rising. The air in the cabin felt thicker now, as if it had been slowly pressing in on us. My stomach twisted. I wanted to leave, but at the same time, I didn't. There was something keeping me here. Around midnight, we decided to go for a walk to clear our heads, though I was hesitant. Something told me it wasn't safe, but Drew insisted. "Let's make this a true adventure," he said, and Mia reluctantly agreed. Ryan was already on his way out the door, stumbling a bit as he tried to keep his balance. We grabbed flashlights and stepped into the cold night air. The woods felt alive with every step we took, like something was moving just beyond our sight. The distant growl was still there, but it had changed, becoming sharper, angrier. Mia kept glancing over her shoulder, and I couldn't help but follow her gaze. The trees seemed to close in around us, the shadows stretching long and dark, moving like they had a life of their own. "I don't like this," Mia muttered, her voice barely a whisper. "Stop being paranoid," Ryan said, rolling his eyes. But that was when it happened. A crash from the woods, a massive thud, followed by the sound of branches snapping, closer this time. We all froze. My heart slammed against my chest. I was too terrified to move. Then, out of the trees, a shape emerged. At first, I thought it was just a man, but as it stepped into the beam of my flashlight, I felt my stomach drop. It wasn't human. It was too tall, too broad. Its skin was a sickly shade of gray, its eyes glowing amber in the darkness. It was hunched over, like a wolf, but it had the frame of a man. Its teeth glinted in the flashlight's beam as it bared them in what looked like a snarl. "Run," I whispered, my voice barely a breath, but Mia had already turned, her feet pounding against the dirt path as she screamed for us to follow. The creature didn't move at first. It stood there, watching us, its head tilting as though it was studying us. Then, just as I turned to run, it let out an ear-piercing howl that shook the trees around us. It was the sound of a beast, a thing that wasn't supposed to exist. We ran. It felt like I couldn't breathe, my lungs burning as I pushed myself faster, dodging trees, rocks, anything I could to escape. The creature was behind us, its growls growing louder, and I could hear it gaining on us, its footsteps heavy and deliberate. We reached the cabin, and Drew threw open the door, pulling everyone inside. The lock snapped into place, but the creature was still there, its low growl vibrating through the walls. Mia was crying, her body shaking uncontrollably, while Ryan stood by the window, his eyes wide in disbelief. "I thought you said it was a joke, Ryan?" Drew spat, his face pale. I didn't know," Ryan stammered, backing away from the window. The growls faded as we huddled together, but the air was still thick with something, hungry. I felt it pressing in on me, the silence deafening. We stayed locked in that cabin all night, every little sound making us jump. I couldn't sleep. I didn't know what to think anymore. Mia had insisted we leave, but Drew refused. "We'll be fine," he said. "It's just a bear or something." But I knew it wasn't. The creature wasn't a bear. It wasn't anything from this world. When morning came, we ventured outside cautiously, the daylight offering some comfort, but the woods felt wrong. The trees were too still, the ground too silent. It was like the creature had never been there at all, as if it had never existed. We packed up and left quickly, not even bothering to argue. Drew, Ryan, and Mia didn't speak much as we made the long drive back. No one dared bring up what we'd seen. I haven't spoken about that night since. I've tried to forget it, tried to bury it deep inside, but sometimes, when the moon is full, I can still hear the growl, distant but unmistakable. It feels like it's waiting for me, waiting for us. And I know that whatever it was, whatever that thing was, it's still out there, somewhere in those woods, waiting for the next blood moon. Hey everyone, thanks for listening. If you stuck around until the end, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and click the notification bell so you never miss a new episode. As always, I'm looking for more story ideas, so drop a comment below with any themes or experiences you'd like to hear next. Stay safe out there, and until next time, keep your eyes open.